The Honourable the Speaker.
Almighty God, we give thanks to you, the Creator of the universe, and humbly beseech you to direct and prosper the deliberations of the members of this House here assembled for the advancement of your glory and the trust and welfare of the people of Trinidad and Tobago. Grant that peace and happiness, truth and justice may be established among us for all generations. Amen, amen. Namaste.
Oath or affirmation, announcements by the Speaker.
Honourable members, I have received communication from the following. Mr. Prakash Ramada, MP, member for St. Augustine, has requested leave of absence from today's sitting. The leave which the member seeks is granted. Honourable members, I have also received correspondence from the Vice President of the Senate dated April 5th, 2019, which states as follows. Dear Honourable Speaker, referral of Income Tax Amendment Bill 2019 to Joint Select Committee. Your letter dated April 2nd, 2019 on the subject at caption refers. I wish to advise that at a sitting held on Tuesday, April 2nd, 2019, the Senate concurred with the House of Representatives that the Income Tax Amendment Bill 2019 be referred to the Joint Select Committee established for the consideration and report on the Mutual Administrative Assistance in Tax Matters Bill 2018 and the Tax Information Exchange Agreements Bill 2018. Accordingly, I respectfully request that the House of Representatives be informed of this decision at the earliest convenience, please. Respectfully, Senator Nigel De Freitas, Vice President of the Senate.
Bills brought from the Senate. Petition. Petition lodged by the member for Couva North on behalf of the Kabir Association of Trinidad, seeking to amend the Kabir Association of Trinidad Incorporation Act 1932 by a private bill in order to change the name of the organization to the Kabir Panth Association of Trinidad and Tobago.
Member for Couva North.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I beg to present a petition on behalf of the members of the Kabir Association of Trinidad of Limehead Road, Chase Village, Shoguanas. I move that the clerk now be allowed to read the petition.
Honourable members, is it agreed?
Agreed.
Please proceed.
The humble petition of the members of the Kabir Association of Trinidad of Limehead Road, Chase Village, Shoguanas, hereinafter referred to as the Kabir Association in the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago, respectfully showeth that the Kabir Association was incorporated on the 28th day of December 1932 via an Act of Parliament entitled the Kabir Association of Trinidad Incorporation Act 1932, Act number 36 of 1932. That the Kabir Association is governed by a constitution which provides for an executive to administer its general affairs. That the aims and objectives of the Kabir Association are, inter alia, to provide for the Kabir Panthis of Trinidad and Tobago full enjoyment of all religious liberties and to make representation to government and other competent authorities for this purpose. To propagate and teach the tenets of Sadhguru Kabir Sahib, including the teaching of Hindi and Sanskrit. To establish and maintain libraries and bookstores and book depots for distribution and/or sale of books in keeping with the spirit of the Kabir Panth religious belief and philosophy. To purchase, take on lease, or in exchange, hire or otherwise to receive and acquire any real or personal property which may be necessary or convenient for all or any of its objects. To sell, manage, lease, mortgage, dispose of, or otherwise deal with all or any of the property of the association for its benefits. To do things possible for the intellectual, moral, social, physical, and economic improvements of all its members generally as may deemed fit and proper by the central executive. To create unity and mutual regard among all peoples and to abstain from any discrimination whatsoever. To promote and encourage the teaching of Sattvic cultural activities. To uphold the rule of law and to support the principles of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. That your petitioners are desirous of amending the name of the Kabir Association to the Kabir Panth Association of Trinidad and Tobago by a private bill to further its objectives and specifically to facilitate the issuing of marriage licenses by its priests. Wherefore, your petitioners humbly pray that this Honorable House will be pleased to take these premises into consideration and grant leave to your petitioners to proceed with the introduction of a private bill for the amendment of the Kabir Association of Trinidad Incorporation Act 1932 to change the name of the organization to the Kabir Panth Association of Trinidad and Tobago in order that they may effectively pursue and achieve the objectives outlined. And your petitioners in duty bound will ever pray. Dated the 28th day of March, 2019. Signed Daniel Jagdeo, Pramati Das Pantin. I hereby certify that this petition is in accordance with the rules of the governing petitions.
Honorable members, the question is that the petitioner be granted leave to proceed. All in favor say aye. Aye. Any against? The ayes have it. Leave is granted.
Papers.
The Minister of Rural Development and Local Government.
Madam Speaker, on behalf of the Minister of Rural Development and Local Government, I have the honor to lay paper number 1, the Draft Elections and Boundaries Commission, Local Government and Tobago House of Assembly Order 2019. Thank you very kindly.
The Deputy Speaker.
Madam Speaker, I have the honor to lay paper number 2, the 31st Annual Report of the Integrity Commission of Trinidad and Tobago for the year ending 31st December 2018. Thank you.
The Minister of Finance.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I have the honor to lay the following papers. Papers 3 to 5, the audited financial statements of National Quarries Company Limited for the financial years ended September 30th, 2013, 2014, and 2015. 6, the report of the Auditor General of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago on the financial statements of the Regulated Industries Commission for the year ended December 31st, 2014. 7 to 8, the report of the Auditor General of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago on the financial statements of the Tunapuna Piarco Regional Corporation for the years ended September 30th, 2009 and 2010. 17, the Financial Amendment Revocation Regulations 2019. I beg to move that papers 3 to 5 be referred to the Public Accounts Enterprises Committee and papers 6 to 8 be referred to the Public Accounts Committee.
Honorable members, the question is that papers 3 to 5 be referred to the Public Accounts Enterprises Committee and papers 6 to 8 be referred to the Public Accounts Committee. All in favor say aye. Aye. Any against? The ayes have it. The Minister of Public Administration.
Madam Speaker, I have the honor to lay the administrative report of the National Information and Communication Technology Company Limited, IGovTT, for the year ended September 30th, 2017. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
The Minister of State in the Office of the Prime Minister.
Madam Speaker, I have the honor to lay the annual report of the Children's Authority of Trinidad and Tobago for the year ended September 30th, 2018.
The Minister of Works and Transport.
On behalf of the Minister of Works and Transport, I have the honor to lay paper number 9, the administrative report of the Point Lisas Industrial Port Development Corporation Limited for the year 2015. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Leader of the House.
Madam Speaker, on behalf of the Leader of the House, I have the honor to lay the following papers. Papers 12 and 13, the responses to the 16th report of the Public Administration and Appropriations Committee on an examination into the implementation of the Public Sector Investment Program. The responses are from the Ministry of Works and Transport and the Ministry of Finance. Paper number 14, the ministerial response of the Ministry of Tourism to the 15th report of the Public Administration and Appropriations Committee on an examination into the expenditure and internal controls of the Ministry of Tourism. Thank you very kindly, Madam Speaker.
The Minister of Tourism.
Madam Speaker, I have the honor to lay the administrative report of the Ministry of Tourism for fiscal years 2015 and 2017.
Reports from committees.
The member for Diego Martin, North East.
Madam Speaker, I have the honor to present the interim report of the Joint Select Committee established to consider and report on the Trinidad and Tobago Revenue Authority Bill 2018.
The member for Miaro.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I have the honor to present the 6th report of the Joint Select Committee on Land and Physical Infrastructure on an inquiry into the establishment of systems for the maintenance of drainage and roadways. Thank you.
Prime Minister's questions, urgent questions.
Honorable members, I just wish to draw to your attention the presence of some very young citizens in the gallery. They look as if they're from a primary school who've come to see their democracy in action. The member for Couva South.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. To the Minister of Works and Transport, given the public reports that the Chairman of the Port Authority of Trinidad and Tobago and the Chairman of the National Infrastructure Development Committee, NITCO, traveled to Malta in February to inspect the MV, and Madam Speaker, forgive my French, Jean de la Villette, could the Minister inform this House on what technical expertise did these chairmen rely on for their assessment?
Minister of Works and Transport.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, the chairman of NITCO and the Port Authority of Trinidad and Tobago visited Virtue Holdings to inspect the vessel. Their role was not to conduct marine inspection, but rather to see how the vessel operated. The technical expertise was satisfied by a qualified agency who provided NITCO with a class certificate for the vessel. An independent, international, reputable agency, DNV, are the ones we rely on for technical expertise. Madam Speaker, it is noteworthy that on arrival of the vessel in Trinidad and Tobago, the Maritime Service Division will also conduct technical and safety checks. I thank you.
Supplemental member for Couva South.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Mr. Minister, could you advise this House, is it the normal policy of these two state enterprises to procure vessels on behalf of the taxpayers of this country to the tune of hundreds of millions of dollars, utilizing no technical expertise from Trinidad and Tobago?
Minister.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. NITCO is a procurement agency for the government of Trinidad and Tobago. The Port Authority is also a procurement agency and operating the Inter-Island Sea Ferry. technical expertise do not rely in both these agencies, and that is why we depend on an international independent agency for this technical advice. Thank you.
Supplemental, member for Couva South.
Madam Speaker, I'll give way to my colleague.
Supplemental, member for Caroni East.
Honourable Minister, would you be prepared to have available for transparency and accountability and probity the findings of that technical committee which you just described?
Minister of Works and
Thank you. Madam Speaker, in keeping with this government policy of always being transparent with the population, I am quite prepared, if requested, to make that available. Thank you.
Member for Oropouche West.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. To the Minister of Works and Transport. With regard to recent reports indicating that the director of Virtue Ferries, the Maltese company responsible for the procurement of the new fast ferry for the Sea Bridge, is currently before the courts on bribery and money laundering charges, could the Minister indicate whether the government intends to continue the transaction in light of these revelations?
Minister of Works and Transport.
Madam Speaker, I'm a bit surprised at this question coming from the opposition bench. However, the answer is yes. There is nothing illegal in the contract that NITCO is about to enter into with Virtue Ferries. Everyone, the last time I checked in Trinidad and Tobago, is presumed innocent until proven guilty. If a company ceases to exist due to one of its directors being convicted, there are clauses in the contract to protect the government of and the people of Trinidad and Tobago. I thank you.
Supplemental, member for Oropouche.
Thank you very much, Minister. Minister, are you aware that this vessel, given the developments in Malta involving those key persons before criminal courts, not civil courts, that this vessel could also be the subject of a civil forfeiture arrangement?
Minister of Works and Transport.
Madam Speaker, if the member for Oropouche East had read the action that is in the court, he would recognize it has nothing to do with Virtue Ferries. Also, again, the last time I checked, in this country, if you have a matter before the court, it does not eliminate you from participating in anything. If that was the rule in Trinidad and Tobago, very soon this government might find itself speaking to itself in the parliament. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Supplemental, member for Oropouche East.
Could the minister correct himself from statements made in the public that the contractors in this country are before the courts charged by the government, not the police? So there's a fundamental difference. Do you agree with these developments in Malta as opposed to Trinidad?
East, I will not allow that question. Member for Caroni East.
Minister, would you continue to be so adamant that the government will continue with the leasing of this ferry, despite the fact that the company is embroiled in such nefarious and criminal matters before its completion?
Member for Oropouche, member for Caroni East, I will not allow that based on what has gone before. Member for Oropouche West.
Honourable Minister, the Jean de la Valette, is it similarly designed to be a riverboat like the Galleon's Passage?
I will not allow that question. Member for Couva South.
Thank you. Minister, could you tell this House what will be the daily charter rate in terms of a 12-hour workday and also taking into consideration overtime payments, what it will cost on a daily basis?
That question does not arise. It's out of order. Member for Caroni East.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. To the Honourable Minister of Education, could the Minister indicate the consequences and remedial action required to be taken with respect to the concerns regarding the mathematical component of the secondary entrance assessment examination papers yesterday, Thursday, the 4th of 2019?
Minister of Education.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. I know not of what the member of currently speaks. If the member is referring to comments made by students that certain questions were challenging, that is expected. It happens all the time. Madam Speaker, any educator who is worth his salt will know that a well-designed examination must include a wide range of questions, coming from simple questions to the higher order questions that require interpretation and analysis. And this is exactly what happened. In addition to this, Madam Speaker, CXC has standard procedures for marking exams, including any issues that might come up. Thank you very much.
Supplemental member for Caroni East.
Sir, are you aware that there were a number of schools where the students experienced marked anxiety and the examination processes went beyond the period of time? One example is Grant Memorial Primary School.
Caroni East, I will not allow that as a supplemental question.
All right, can I ask another supplemental? Could you provide any further comment for your possible consideration on addressing the Caribbean Examination Council on the complaints reported from hundreds of students with reference to irregular issues on the mathematical paper, particularly the answers to two questions?
Member for Caroni East, I'm not going to allow that question.
Why?
Having not arisen out of the response. Member for Caroni East, I'm sure you don't mean that. Kindly have a seat. We both can't stand. We both can't stand at the same time, and I've already ruled. Do you have another supplemental question?
With reference to the answer just given by the minister, would he consider meeting and addressing the Caribbean Examination Council on this irregular issue of the mathematics examination yesterday?
Again, I will not allow that question.
You know the issues.
Member for Couva North.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. To the Minister of Health, in light of the recent fire at the Radiology Department of the Port of Spain General Hospital, which displaced several in-house patients, could the Minister state where these patients are currently located?
Just before the Minister of Health stands up, I know question time evokes a lot of emotion. I will ask members who are not addressing me to please keep quiet. Minister of Health.
Thank you. Madam Speaker, patients were not displaced from Port of Spain General Hospital. The approximately 70 patients were quickly decanted from their wards to other spaces within the hospitals. I want to thank at this point in time all our nurses, security personnel, attendants, who once again rose to the occasion. The patients were then sent back to their original wards within 3 hours once the fire services gave the all clear. So at all material times, the patients were located within the confines of Port of Spain General Hospital. Once the all clear was given by the fire services 3 hours later, they were sent back to their original wards. During that time, they were under the care and supervision of medical personnel, ensuring that they received full coverage, full medical coverage during those 3 hours. Thank you very much, Madam Speaker.
Supplemental member for Couva North.
Thank you very much. Minister, in light of the fire at the Radiology Department, what is the plan with respect to doing CT scans, mammograms, and other tests?
Minister of Health.
So what I can tell you right now is that radiology services, CT scans and ultrasound, which were temporarily suspended from Friday, March 29th, and have started back. Thank you very much for that. X-ray services continued uninterrupted during the period of time. So there was no significant absence of radiology services during that period of time. The only component that we are still grappling with is mammography, and patients will be sent to other centers, but X-rays, CTs are fully operational after a brief period when they were down during the fire, and within about 48 hours they were back up. Thank you very much, Madam Speaker.
Member for Faisaban.
Thank you very much, Minister. Minister, can you indicate whether this time you're in possession of a fire report?
Sorry?
I say, can you indicate whether you're in possession of a fire report that might indicate the reason for the fire?
Minister of Health.
I checked with the CEO of the Northwest Regional Health Authority just about a half an hour ago, and they have not yet received the report as to the cause of the fire from the fire services, so I will not be commenting or speculating at this point in time. Thank you very much, Madam Speaker.
Madam Speaker, question number 5 to the Honourable Minister of Works and Transport. In light of the recent burning of a connecting bridge in Princestown, which has severely impacted upon the mobility of 2 communities, could the Minister inform this House what urgent measures will be taken to bring swift relief to the affected residents?
Minister of Works and Transport.
Speaker, as said before, one should never burn their bridges. Madam Speaker, the bridge engineers of the Ministry of Works conducted a site visit to the area and have developed and designed a tender document for the replacement of the affected bridge. The invitation to tender was issued on April 4, 2019. Work is expected to commence by the middle of next week and is expected to be completed in 14 days from the start of the project. The solution which was developed took into consideration improved materials which would prevent a reoccurrence.
Supplemental, member for Princestown.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Honourable Minister, could you say whether an archaic wooden bridge will be considered as a replacement, or will we move towards a more permanent replacement?
Minister of Works and Transport.
Madam Speaker, this bridge was in perfect condition before the fire. However, what we recognize happening of late, there have been several protests by fire on our roads. What is unique about these protests is that certain councillors opposed to this government have been seen around these protests. And very recently, 2 councillors from the Siparia Regional Corporation were questioned by the police in connection with these fires. In this case, Madam Speaker, someone put tires on the bridge. This was in the national newspaper and on television. And in the case of this bridge, someone placed tires on the bridge and caught it afire.
Minister of Works and Transport, your time is now spent.
Thank you.
Honourable members, question time is now spent.
Questions on notice, questions for oral answer.
Leader of the House.
Thank you, Madam. There are 14 questions for oral answer. Sorry, we'll be answering 13 of these questions. We're asking for a 2-week deferral of question number 140. There are no questions for written answer. Thank you, Madam.
Member for Naparima.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. To the Minister of Finance, could the Minister provide a list of achievements? To the Minister, 158 to the Minister of Finance.
I'm surprised. There are a lot more questions before that. Madam Speaker, over the fiscal 2018 year, the lobbying group undertook the following activities in order to promote trade and investment between the United States and Trinidad and Tobago. A, increase the visibility of Trinidad and Tobago by working directly with leaders of Senate and congressional committees and senators and congressmen who represent areas that constitute important matters and other interests for Trinidad and Tobago. B, monitored legislative issues affecting Trinidad and Tobago in the United States Congress. C, conducted research and formulated a proposed economic diversification strategy that would establish Trinidad and Tobago as a corporate outsourcing jurisdiction. D, engaged Citigroup to discuss with the government the possibility of establishing a financial hub in Trinidad and Tobago. specific options for diversification, and additional risk mitigation initiatives that would support this effort. E, identified opportunities and strategies to engage multinational corporations to potentially increase commercial shipping and dry dock construction in Trinidad and Tobago. F, promoted Trinidad and Tobago's economic diversification efforts related to the proposed expansion of gaming in a regulated and taxed environment. G, facilitated discussions between the government of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago, Ambassador to the United States, with U.S. members of Congress on Trinidad and Tobago's economic diversification efforts with a view to increasing U.S. direct foreign investment in Trinidad and Tobago. Held discussions with senior staff of the United States Foreign Affairs Committee on various issues of concern to Trinidad and Tobago, including the de-risking phenomenon in the Caribbean and Latin America and the economic and national security challenges posed by the lack of correspondent banking relationships in the region and the establishment of Trinidad and Tobago as a regional banking hub. U.S. Trinidad and Tobago economic relationships and national security partnerships, the Caribbean Basin Initiative, the Caribbean Basin Security Initiative. I, discussed a proposed engagement strategy between the United States Secretary of Commerce and the Trinidad and Tobago Ambassador to enhance bilateral trade, investment, and economic opportunities between the United States and the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago. J, participated in discussions with senior government officials on securing Department of Homeland Security airport pre-clearance designation for the Piarco International Airport and met with House of Representatives Homeland Security staff on the airport pre-clearance program. K, collaborated with the Trinidad and Tobago Embassy on special projects such as the Trinidad and Tobago Diaspora Engagement Events, economic development initiatives that would stimulate trade and investment opportunities in the United States for Trinidad and Tobago's manufacturing sector through a strengthened supply chain, financial services sector, and energy sector. L, formulated a communication strategy with the Office of the Prime Minister around establishing a spotlight on Trinidad and Tobago's energy sector to complement the government's efforts to achieve more favorable energy sector agreements for the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago. M, secured additional interest by U.S. officials in participating in official travel to Trinidad and Tobago. And N, discussed strategies for engagement in future events of the Congressional Black Caucus Annual Legislative Conference to expose the conference attendees and the broader American public to the diversity of the Republic's citizenry. These strategies would serve to strengthen the ties between the government of Trinidad and Tobago and members of the U.S. Congress. This is just a few of the activities the lobbyist was involved in.
Supplemental member for Naparima.
Once the minister give over-ended questions, formulated, participated, collaborated, discussed, facilitated. Could you give us tangible, quantifiable benefits of Trinidad and Tobago in terms of trade and investments?
Minister of Works, Minister of Finance, I'm sorry.
I just did.
Supplemental member.
Could the minister tell us how much was spent for the services provided during fiscal 2018?
Minister of Finance.
I do not have that information with me. If the member poses the question, I will answer it.
Supplemental member.
Is the minister, could the minister state why he's satisfied, given the deterioration in relations between the U.S. and our country, that we are getting value for money from Group DC LLC?
Minister of Finance.
Madam Speaker, that question is based on a false premise and a fallacy. We have excellent relationships with the United States of America.
Madam, based on that question, if we have excellent relations, why did your leader take umbrage to the ambassador's statement about our government?
And allow that. Member for Princestown.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Honourable Minister, on line item K, you indicated that one of the achievements of the lobby group was arranging diaspora events. Can you explain why do we need an American company to tell us how to speak to Trinidadians?
Minister of Finance.
Madam Speaker, I identified the activities that the group was involved in. I am very happy that our lobbyist was able to interact with our diaspora and strengthen and deepen ties with our diaspora in the United States.
Member for Urupuch West.
Question number 112 to the Minister of Works and Transport.
Minister of Works and Transport.
Thank you again, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, alleged counterfeit driving permit was not issued by the Transport Division of the Ministry of Works and Transport, the licensing office. There was not sufficient information to launch an investigation. The only information available to the licensing office was as outlined in the newspaper report. It is noteworthy that the police have over the years discovered several counterfeit driver's permits and have sought the assistance of the licensing office to bring the holders of these permits before the court. To counteract this, at the beginning of 2017, the Transport Division launched its new driver's permit system, which contains several enhanced security features to ensure that counterfeit permits are easily detected. I thank you.
Supplemental, member for Urupuch West.
Has anyone been held accountable for those counterfeit permits thus far?
Minister of Works and Transport.
Thank you. Madam Speaker, the specific driver's permit in question was not issued by the licensing office, so we could not hold anybody accountable for issuing it there. However, there are ongoing investigations at the licensing office for several transactions that is being investigated now by the police. I thank you.
Member for Urupuch West.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Question number 113 to the Minister of Works and Transport.
Minister of Works and Transport.
Thank you again, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, repair to the landslip is a very complicated and not a quick fix. However, the ministry is making every effort to ensure that the road remains passable while awaiting the engineering designs and ultimate construction. Further to my response on April 27, 2018 regarding the landslip along the Plock Road and San Francisco, the following status update is noteworthy. The Plock Road and the San Francisco landslip have been included under Package 8 of the Landslip Repair Program, Phase 2. This package consists of approximately 12 landslips. Negotiations have been completed with the design consultants who are being procured through NIDCO. The design period is approximately 10 months for Package 8. A note is being prepared seeking Cabinet approvals for the award of a design consultant contract. Upon receipt of this approval, pending receipt of the availability of funding, the contract will commence. All things being equal, the design construction can commence by end of May 2019. Upon completion of the designs, procurement of a contractor to conduct the walls would begin. Cabinet approval would then be sought to award the construction contract. Upon receipt of the approvals and pending receipt of the availability of funding, the construction contract would commence. All things being equal, construction work can commence by September 2020. I thank you.
Supplemental, member for Urupuch West.
Honourable Minister, on the 27th of April 2018, Hansard, are you aware that it was recited here that this particular landslip has been deemed critical and has been included in the BLT program? Would you agree with me, Honourable Minister, if something is critical, would it take 4+ years to try and commence and construct this landslip?
Thank you. Madam Speaker, there are several critical landslips in Trinidad and Tobago. This has been deemed critical, and it is on the BLT program. The landslip program is part of the BLT program. However, this is not a simple landslip. This was repaired sometime between 2010 and 2015, and it failed. It failed. So it is on our critical list, but it has to be designed, and it has to be done in a way that it will not reoccur in the future. The Ministry of Works, as early as yesterday, were working on the landslip to ensure that it remains passable. Thank you.
Supplemental, member for Oropouche West.
Honourable Minister, are you aware that this landslide really poses a serious threat to the life, limb and safety of the persons living adjacent to this landslide?
Minister,
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I have visited this landslip on at least 2 occasions. And the risk and the threat that exists there existed between 2010 and 2015. However, as I said before, it is not a simple landslip, and the Ministry of Works yesterday had a team there doing rehabilitation work to ensure that the road remains passable until the process can be completed. Thank you.
Member for Oropouche West.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Question number 114 to the Minister of Public Utilities.
Minister of Public Utilities.
Madam Speaker, Plock Road, San Francisco is supplied with pipe-borne water from the Caroni Water Treatment Plant and the desalination plant at Point Lisas. The water supplied to this area is, as all areas throughout the country, is negatively impacted by the reduction in production during the dry season as a result of reduced precipitation and increased evaporation. On average, dry season production is 10% below the peak production of 242 million imperial gallons per day in the rainy season. The impact can be expected to be greater this year, given the forecasts of the Meteorological Division for an abnormally harsh dry season. Based on prevailing reservoir levels, the Water Resource Agency, and by extension WASA, has curtailed production out of the Caroni treatment plant to between 60 and 70 million gallons a day on average, from the 75 million gallons a day in the rainy season. The Ministry of Public Utilities and WASA have been proactively seeking to mitigate the impact of this situation through its national public education campaign in the print, electronic, and various social media platforms describing and sensitizing the population as to the prevalent severe weather conditions and promoting increased conservation, together with other measures to increase water loss through leaks reductions. During the rainy season, Plock Road, San Francisco area normally receives a pipe-borne supply of water 2 to 3 days per week, Wednesday through Friday. However, during the dry season, production conditions, as is presently the case, this supply is reduced to once per week. And Madam Speaker, I just would like to add that this once per week supply during the dry season predates me and this government's existence. Currently, the water is supplied from 6 p.m. on Wednesday to 6 a.m. on Thursday. This new schedule has been published in the print media and is available on the authority's website. Over the period, Monday the 25th to Wednesday the 27th of February 2019, the supply of pipe-borne water to the area was further disrupted by the break in one of 2 pumps at the Take Village booster station, which is used to pump water to this community. Houses which did not receive a pipe-borne water supply on Wednesday, the 27th of February, were provided with truck-borne water supply on March the 2nd, 2019. The pump, as previously mentioned, has been repaired, and supply of pipe-borne water to the area has been restored to the normal dry season schedule of 1 day per week from Wednesday, March the 6th, 2019. Since that time, WASA has not received on record any new complaints regarding its supply of pipe-borne water to the area in keeping with its new published dry schedule. Thank you very much.
West?
Minister, from what you have just advanced, that persons in San Francisco are not concerned about evaporation of water. Are you saying, Honourable Minister, or are you aware that the schedule in San Francisco is not working for the residents? Are you aware that it's not working?
Minister of Public Utilities.
Madam Speaker, as I mentioned, the reduction in water supply that presently exists in San Francisco, especially during the dry season, of bringing it to 1 day a week, is something that predates both me and this government. During the dry season, through a historic period, over a long period of time, the water supply to the people of San Francisco and this particular area has always been reduced to 1 day a week. I recognize that that is not sufficient, and we have been working based on work that we have been doing to the Teak Village booster station, and that we have initiated, that should see an improvement in that supply of water during the rainy season. However, at this particular point in time, it is impossible because of all that is happening in the country, which predates and which we have advised the population. It is impossible to continue to pump more water to the system because we are curtailing production of water to the citizens throughout the country, which includes that particular area.
Supplemental member for Oropouche West.
Are you aware that for 23 continuous days, residents in Pluck Road did not have pipe-borne water? 23 continuous days.
He should resign.
Member, that question is a bit vague. Member for Faizabad.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Question number 134 to the Minister of Health.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. The answer to part A is the expected completion date for roof repairs at the Labour Ward is May 15th, 2019. Answer to part B, the CT scanner at the Accident and Emergency Department is fully functional. Answer to part C, all 3 lifts are fully functional. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
The bath supplemental.
Thank you, Minister. Minister, can you indicate how long the CT scanner, the A&E department, would have been down?
Minister of Health.
The CT scanner at the A&E was down on the 12th, from the 12th to the 21st of March, and then for 5 days thereafter. The reason why we could not get it repaired fast, and I'm glad you asked the question, when we bought that CT scanner, we bought it from Agent A. During the time after it was installed, the agency moved to another person, Agent B. The warranty was held by Agent A, but Agent B had to supply the parts to fulfill the warranty aspect. And there was, it took us some time to get Agent A and Agent B together to fully appreciate their liability under the terms of the warranty. Because as I said, when it was bought, Agent A had the warranty. During the life that we had it, the agency moved from A to B. And that was the delay in getting the CT scanner back up. So we got both parties together under one roof, and they agreed on the way forward, and now the CT scanner is fully operational. Thank you very much, Madam Speaker.
Supplemental member for Baratari Sanwan.
Minister, could you tell me if there are still any maintenance contracts for these items?
Minister of Health.
Yes, I think with this new one, we went for an extended warranty after the first couple of years with 1 year extra. What I would double check, but I believe that that is the standard operating procedure now in the RHAs for all major medical equipment that we go for extended warranties. Thank you very much.
Supplemental member for Baratari Sanwan.
No, I was not speaking about extended warranties, also an additional maintenance contract on these machines, not just the extended warranties.
Okay. That I will check for you and get back to you. Thank you very much.
Member for Faizabad.
Speaker, question number 135 to the Minister of Education.
Minister of Education.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, records at the Education Facilities Company Limited, EFCL, indicate that the Superior East Secondary School was 48% complete. Madam Speaker, the last contractor, Beijing Lujian Construction Corporation Limited, was terminated on January 28, 2015 due to poor performance. There has been no further progress on this project to date due to the lack of funding. Consideration will be given to resuming this project in fiscal 2019-2020. Thank you.
Supplemental member for Faizabad.
Thank you. Thank you, Minister. Minister, in response to a similar question 1 year ago in March of 2018, you had indicated that the project was 48% complete. Are you now confirming that no further work has been done at that site during the past year?
Minister of Education.
Madam Speaker, that is exactly what I said. I was very clear. I was very clear to say that the problem is funding and nothing was done.
Member for Faizabad.
Nothing was done.
And number 136 to the Minister of Education.
Minister of Education.
Madam Speaker, the construction of the Avocat Vidic ECCE Center is 100% complete, while external work is 98% complete. Progress was halted on this project due to non-payment of outstanding invoices to both the consultant and the contractor, totaling approximately $9.3 million. As a result, the necessary liaison and follow-up with the Water and Sewage Authority, the Ministry of Works and Transport, and the Regional Corporation to obtain the necessary statutory approvals and a completion certificate has not taken place. As with several unfinished projects under the purview of this Ministry of Education, efforts are being made to identify funds for the payment of outstanding sums and for completion of the project. However, at this time, I am unable to say when the center will open. Thank you.
Member for Chaguanas East.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Question number 145 to the Minister of Health.
Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Answer to Part A. The current number of vehicles assigned to the division is 71. And B, the current number of operational vehicles at the division is 28. Thank you very much.
Supplemental member for Chaguanas East.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Will the Minister be able to indicate to us what is the optimal required size of the fleet to satisfy the needs for the insect vector in Trinidad?
Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, ideally we would like to have all vehicles up, but the real proof of whether our insect vector is performing optimally is not measured in vehicles, but in dengue cases, because that is a real marker of how successful an insect vector division works. Madam Speaker, because we are so effective, the year 2014 confirmed dengue cases 331, 2015, 23, 2016, 81. But listen to how dengue cases have dropped because of the efficiency and effectiveness. 2017, 8. Went from 81 to 8. 2018, 3. So in 5 years, we moved from 331 confirmed to 3. And that is mainly because while hardware is good, while vehicles is good, what we have done now is utilizing more and more technology in the form of a GIS system. And that is not a replacement for vehicles, but it allows us to work smarter instead of working harder. So in this country, I am proud of our insect vector response, and it is manifested in our confirmed dengue cases, moving from 331 in 2014 to 3. That is 1% now in 2018 of what we had in 2014. But we are taking all measures to bring the vehicle fleet back up to strength. Thank you very much, Madam Speaker.
Supplemental member for Chaguanas East.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Honourable Minister, I'm asking the question again in a different way. Can you say whether you have sufficient vehicles and chemicals to take care of the needs of the people in terms of insect vector for this country?
So we have sufficient chemicals, but as I explained, we are using our hardware in a much more effective manner by using GIS. You always speak about Singapore. This is Singapore in action in Trinidad and Tobago, relying on technology to pinpoint where mosquitoes are breeding, and you have a targeted response. You have a targeted response now, because we started using GIS in 2016. And member for Carney East, Sote Voce, it is not underreporting. Let me tell you why. Because suspected dengue cases in 2014 was 5,157. 2015, 1,687. 2016, 1,522. 2017, 722. 2018, 644. So it's not underreporting, as you said, Sote Voce. It is an insect vector control division using technology since 2016 to get these outstanding results. Thank you very much, Madam Speaker.
Minister mentioned that the hemorrhagic had hemorrhagic fever.
Supplementary member for Faizabad.
Thank you, Minister. I'm sure the population would be very happy to hear the reduction in cases. Can you indicate whether there has been any concurrent decrease in the number of deaths from dengue during that period? Would you be in a position to provide those figures?
Minister of Health?
I will get that for you, but one can logically conclude that if you have 3 confirmed dengue cases in 2018, which is 1% of the cases you had in 2014, I think the logical conclusion could be that. Thank you very much, Madam Speaker.
Member for Shogunas East.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Question 146 to the Minister of Energy and Energy Industries.
Minister of Energy and Energy Industries.
That is me at this point in time. Thank you, Madam Speaker. Oil has been extracted from the Angostura oil field off the east coast of Trinidad since January 2005. The total volume extracted up to the end of February 2019 was 77,230,914 barrels.
Supplementary member for Shogunas East.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Honourable Minister, might you be able to give us a value of what was extracted to date?
Minister of Energy and Energy
I would have
Industries.
most certainly provided that if you had asked it. Pose the question, it will be answered.
Member for Shogunas East.
Question 147. The Minister of National Security.
Minister of National Security.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, on November 10th, 2000, in the year 2000, the government of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago acceded to the 1951 Convention and the 1967 Protocol relating to the status of refugees. However, there are no provisions in the Immigration Act, Chapter 1801, or any other enabling law in Trinidad and Tobago to treat with the issue of refugees. There is no domestic law dealing with refugees. Currently, there are 2 documents used by the Immigration Division and the implementing partner for the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, UNHCR, and that is the Living Waters Community, which outline the actions of the representatives of Living Waters Community as well as the officers of the Immigration Division, which are 1, the phased approach towards the establishment of a national policy to address refugee and asylum matters in the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago, and 2, the interim standard operating procedures for treating with asylum seekers and refugees in Trinidad and Tobago. Notwithstanding this, Madam Speaker, the government of Trinidad and Tobago is currently reviewing draft legislation to deal with refugees and asylum seekers, and in the interim, we deal with matters on a case-by-case basis. Unfortunately, previous administrations did not address this situation via domestic legislation.
Supplemental, member for Napri.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Given that we had a refugee stroke asylum problem starting from early 2017 to now, why did the government not act to develop a humane refugee policy that is humane, based on best practices, and recognizes the absorptive capacity of our country?
Minister of National Security.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, despite the hype and despite the continued propaganda by those on the other side, there is no crisis with respect to refugees in Trinidad and Tobago. What we're dealing with is a situation where there are a number of immigrants leaving from Venezuela, coming to Trinidad and Tobago. That does not create a refugee status. They can continue with their Cambridge Analytica ways, Madam Speaker, and continue speaking to the population in that way, but the population knows better.
Supplemental, member for Napri.
Would the Minister agree that the response has been adhocratic and responsive rather than proactive? That given the fact that we may have between 40,000 to 60,000 refugees in Trinidad.
I think you asked the question already.
No, Ms. No.
Minister of National Security.
Madam Speaker, once again, the population sees that what is happening, in particular from the member for Naparima, screaming in one sentence, from 40,000 to 60,000. That is why the government is going with a sensible registration process to register all Venezuelans here in Trinidad and Tobago. And the outcome of that process will give us the real facts and not the UNC propaganda and hype.
Well, sir.
Supplemental, member for Napri.
The Minister then admitting that this government in charge of this country does not know the true number of refugees in our country.
Minister of National Security.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, as I stated, the purpose of our registration process is to get accurate information and data, which will finally put the hype from member for Naparima to sleep.
Supplemental member for Napri.
The Minister, in the ad hoc approach, has developed, given a one-year capacity to work in Trinidad and Tobago. Have you given thought in a strategic, planned manner to what happens after that year?
Minister of National Security.
The answer is yes, Madam Speaker. It is certainly not an ad hoc manner. Ad hoc policy came between 2010 to 2015.
Member for Barrett-Arias-Sanwa.
Pursuant to the Honourable Minister of Health.
Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. During the period September 2015 to present, this administration undertook its own evaluation in developing projects for the San Fernando General Hospital, the Port of Spain General Hospital, and the Eric Williams Medical Sciences Complex, using industry best practices, standard namely the American Institute of Architects and Facility Guidelines Institute. These projects include 1. The development and upgrade of services at the central block of Port of Spain General Hospital, including Phase 1, relocation of existing services comprising central stores and engineering departments. Phase 2, the construction of the new central block, and refurbishment works at the Costard building and sewing buildings to accommodate current and future needs of the Port of Spain General Hospital campus. 2, upgrade of the existing infrastructure and supporting services to current industry standards. These key initiatives undertaken include the design and installation of the following equipment at the National Radiotherapy Center, St. James. A high dose rate HDR brachytherapy unit installed and commissioned in July 2017, and the linear accelerator equipment to be installed by May 2019 and commissioned in June 2019. Upgrade works at labor ward in the remodeling, the colposcopy, nephrology, and call rooms for delivery cubicles at the San Fernando General Hospital in 2017. Refurbishment of wards 18 and 20 at the Eric Williams Medical Sciences Complex in 2017. Upgrade of the accident and emergency departments at the San Fernando General Hospital in 2017 and the Port of Spain General Hospital in 2018, and renovation of wards 201 and 202 with the inclusion of an operating theatre at the maternity department at the Port of Spain General Hospital in 2018-2019 with a dedicated area for the delivery of women and mother and child care. relocation of the ICU and high dependency unit at the Port of Spain General Hospital in 2018, upgrade of the electrical infrastructure at the San Fernando General Hospital in 2017, the Eric Williams Medical Sciences Complex in 2018, and the Port of Spain General Hospital Campus Phase 1 in 2018, and replacement of boiler and water cooling air conditioning chillers to improve overall supply of services and reinstate the redundancy required at Eric Williams Medical Sciences Complex in 2018 and the San Fernando General Hospital in 2017, and San Fernando in 2018. In addition, the development of the user briefs for both the new Sangre Grande Hospital and the Diego Martin Health Center by taking into consideration the opportunities to provide operational efficiency, build flexibility, and enable the campus to evolve and adapt to future needs of its clients. Thank you very much, Madam Speaker.
Supplemental, member for Barataria Sandwich.
Minister, this master plan speaks to tertiary level, high-level surgical centers, standalone surgical centers. It didn't speak to, the reason I asked about the master plans is to see whether the tertiary level standalone centers are going to be developed.
Minister of Health.
Thank you. As I have indicated in the public domain, once all the current hospital constructions projects are finished, Point Fortin, Arima, Sangre Grande phased in, it is the intention of this administration to make centers of excellence like in Eric Williams for tertiary services, San Fernando for certain services. So we are considering that and let hospitals like Arima, Point Fortin be primary, secondary, Sangre Grande, primary, secondary, maybe some tertiary services, and try to have Eric Williams and part of San Fernando and part of Port of Spain dedicated to high-end tertiary services. Thank you very much, Madam Speaker.
Member for Barataria Sandwich.
Minister, I just want you to check to see that there were specialist plans already developed for San Fernando, Eric Williams, and Port of Spain, done with the assistance of the IEDB at the time, and they are specifically directed to those areas, both structure and function. Just would like to look into it.
Sure, thank you.
Member for Faizaban.
Thank you, Minister. I noted some of the projects at San Fernando Hospital, but one of the concerns would be the structure, the aging structure of the old San Fernando Hospital. Do any of your plans include addressing that specifically?
Sure, thank you. Madam Speaker, after the earthquake of September 2018, the Ministry of Works undertook a structural assessment of San Fernando Hospital, San Fernando General Hospital, and they gave the hospital a very high passing grade. So, but there are some works to be done at San Fernando, doors to be replaced, walls to be painted, floors to be redone, but structurally, San Fernando General Hospital has been deemed fit for purpose by the Ministry of Works. Thank you very much, Madam Speaker.
Barataria Sandwich.
Number 162 to the Honourable Minister of National Security.
Minister of National Security.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, the average monthly upkeep cost for an inmate at the Immigration Detention Center, the IDC, is roughly $7,500. The average monthly upkeep for an inmate at the undermentioned prison institutions, that is the remand yard at Golden Grove, the Port of Spain prison, the Golden Grove prison, and the Carrera Island prison, is on average $15,736.22 per month.
Supplemental.
Minister, I understand that we are talking about the Venezuelan refugee problem and giving them cards, etc. Would it be not, would you consider thinking about an amnesty for those in the Immigration Detention Center, not just the Venezuelan, because of the cost factor of $7,500 per month?
Minister of National Security.
Madam Speaker, it will be considered, but I'd like to say that I was at the Immigration Detention Center this week, and the numbers who are outside of the Venezuelans is a handful. So it is not as many of non-Venezuelans being held at the Immigration Detention Center as being made out to be. It is literally a handful.
Honourable members, the time for answers to questions is now expired.
Request for leave to move the adjournment of the House on definite matters of urgent public importance. Statements by ministers.
The Minister of State in the Office of the Prime Minister.
Madam Speaker, I'm authorized by the Cabinet of Trinidad and Tobago to make this statement. In 2015, when this administration took office, we met a suite of children's legislation. 4 major pieces of legislation, which were hastily proclaimed in 2015 before the general election, without proper assessment of the requirements for the proper implementation for these pieces of legislation to support the care and protection of the nation's children. The subsidiary and supporting legislation was not in place, and the policies, staffing, and the institutions to care for children were not in place. Regrettably, members of the opposition and former ministers of the previous government knew that the country was not prepared for the implementation of the new legislation and seized the opportunity to monetarily benefit from their own inaction by taking the state to court. The media has evidence of these court actions, which used our children as pawns to unjustifiably malign the new government, gain political mileage, and abuse our democracy. So I will not speak of these. This government proceeded quickly to address the chaos created by the former government by correcting the deficiencies in the law and enacting regulations to ensure that the authority can properly fulfill its roles and responsibilities. We also moved swiftly to put the necessary infrastructure in place. The policy and operational environment is thus being created to support the care and protection of our nation's children. This government is doing what must be done for our children. Today, I have the opportunity to lay in this August House the annual report of the Children's Authority for fiscal year 2018. The year 2018 marked the first 2 full years of operation that the current board has been at the helm of the authority. There has been significant progress in the work of the authority since 2015. During the year under review, the authority signed Memorandum of Understanding with the Counter-Trafficking Unit of the Ministry of National Security and the Division of Health, Wellness and Family Development of the Tobago House of Assembly. Other agencies which the authority has engaged in developing Memorandum of Understanding include all the regional health authorities, the Child Protection Unit of the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service, the Student Support Services Division of the Ministry of Education, and the Tobago House of Assembly. It is expected that these will be signed during fiscal 2019. Some of the other significant milestones include the opening of an assessment center in Sangre Grande and the South Regional Office and Assessment Center in St. Madeleine. I'm especially pleased to add that the authority has officially expanded its reach to the sister isle of Tobago. A child support center was opened, and there are staff operating out of the Office of the Prime Minister, Central Administrative Services, Tobago. This is part of the continued expansion of the authority's services. In fact, very soon the authority will open its Chaguanas and Tobago assessment centers and regional offices. The authority's expansion of services is not only dependent on finding suitable locations. The human resource complement is central to children and families receiving a range of services. Therefore, a major thrust took place during fiscal 2018 to ensure the authority had staff to manage its increased number of locations. In fiscal 2018, the authority recruited 76 persons, a notable improvement, but by no means the required complement of staff needed to deliver the quality of service our children deserve. The authority's allocation increased by 75% since 2015, and its expenditure increased by 69%. This government has been ensuring that the authority is in a position to provide the best care for our children. I now turn to some of the noteworthy achievements of the authority. These are: 1, the assessment unit completed 259 forensic medical examinations and 28 forensic interviews, ensuring evidence is gathered so that justice is served. The unit also completed 121 full multidisciplinary assessments, which facilitated 121 children in need of care and protection to benefit from the provision of psychosocial, medical, and psychological evaluations. These provided holistic assessments of the children and their families' needs. 2, the Child Support Center provided emergency accommodation for 36 children who received into care. The children were able to benefit from safe accommodation in contrast to their prior living arrangements. 3, the Child and Family Services Unit, which provides support to families and children in need of care and protection, developed a tele-social worker initiative in which low-risk cases received attention through phone communication. The tele-social worker would obtain a holistic understanding of the case while increasing the number of cases actioned. 4, a revised strategic plan was developed for the period 2018 to 2021. This plan is based on a system-strengthening approach which seeks to develop a national child protection system that represents a comprehensive, holistic, inclusive, and coordinated approach to the protection of children. 5, the Public Education and Communications Unit conducted over 60 sensitization sessions in Trinidad and Tobago to various stakeholders, which included children, police, medical practitioners, teachers, social workers, psychologists, and religious organizations. And 6, the National Protocol on Child Abuse will be a major boost to guide the way the social services sector collaboratively addresses the needs of children who present with varying types of abuse and maltreatment. The authority is therefore working with several agencies to develop protocols and MOUs towards the development of the national protocol. In less than 2 months, Madam Speaker, the Children's Authority of Trinidad and Tobago will celebrate 4 years of being operational. While I use the word celebrate, it is done guardedly, because we can only truly celebrate when we are able to assure that every child receives the best possible care and protection. To facilitate this, we need a society that protects children and recognizes that they have rights, particularly the right to be protected from harm. Child protection is not just the work of the Children's Authority. It is the responsibility of every citizen, of every member of this House, of everyone in our beloved country. I thank you, Madam Speaker.
Honourable members have been advised that there is agreement that the Minister of Education shall be allowed 15 minutes to deliver his statement. Minister of Education.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. It is with great pleasure that I address this Honourable House on the matter of the Education Policy Paper 2017-2022, which Cabinet has recently adopted. I dare say that the finalization of this policy is a landmark event in our nation's history, given that the last policy paper on education predates the 21st century, having been promulgated in 1993. Madam Speaker, this government saw it fit to update the education policy to treat with the needs of the 21st century learner, including the skills and learning dispositions required in today's society, and to address the associated challenges. In this age of technological advancement, it is imperative that our learners are able to adapt to change, as well as build and harness competencies in order to apply knowledge to effectively solve problems. The policy is closely aligned to the government's Vision 2030 National Development Strategy, the CARICOM Regional Education and Human Resource Development 2030 Strategy and Action Plan, and the relevant United Nations instruments pertinent to education and sustainable development. The policy was designed along the pillars of 3 strategic goals and derived objectives, which stipulate the inputs and processes necessary to ensure that graduates function at optimal level and contribute to the Trinidad and Tobago of the future. In this vein, the policy treats with various themes, such as information and communication technology, ICT, ICT-infused curriculum, as well as science, technology, research, engineering, arts, and mathematics, known as STREAM, in order to ensure that the 21st century learner is equipped with essential competencies, technological literacy and skills, as well as the communication and the problem-solving skills necessary to function productively in today's economy. Madam Speaker, in order to effectively treat with the deficiencies and shortcomings of any system, these must first be identified. Accordingly, the education policy paper assembles under one heading the areas of concern and pressing issues in education, complemented by policy prescriptions which address and treat with same. These policy prescriptions are specifically detailed for each education subsector and disaggregated into discrete areas of focus, inclusive of human resource management, evaluation and assessment, infrastructure, curriculum, service delivery, promotion of discipline, research and innovation, inclusiveness and lifelong learning and legislation. Review of the Education Act. Madam Speaker, I am particularly pleased that this policy paper provides the basis for the long-awaited overhaul and the modernization of the Education Act. The attendant legislative agenda speaks to inclusion of the early childhood care and education and the tertiary education levels, and review of the legislative framework governing technical vocational education and training. The Ministry of Education is working closely with the Ministry of the Attorney General and Legal Affairs to make this a reality. ECC and special needs education. A key area of focus is early childhood care and education. Madam Speaker, recognizing the importance of ECCE as creating the strong foundation for future achievement and building on the gains made in ECCE since 2006, the policy paper identifies the need to formalize the sector through its inclusion in legislation on education, development, and implementation of a quality assurance system, and implementation of standardized screening for new entrants to ECCE are also singled out for attention. With respect to special needs education, Madam Speaker, in keeping with the concerns expressed by our stakeholders, the policy identifies the need for concentration of the needs of the full spectrum of learners, from challenged to gifted. Areas of special focus include provision and maintenance of educational materials, equipment, and instructional resources to support special education intervention. Upgrade of 3 schools in each education district at each ECC and the secondary levels to accommodate students with physical and sensory disabilities. Provision of adequately equipped resource rooms at the primary level for the provision of special education assessment and intervention services. Recruitment and training to ensure increased capacity within the special education unit. Interagency, interministerial collaboration. And implement school-based policies to support required curriculum modifications adaptations to address individual learners' needs. Madam Speaker, the policy also speaks to the review of the school feeding program, review of arrangements with the Public Transport Service Corporation and contractors for transportation service, assessment of the textbook rental program, adjustments to the GATE program, and continuous review of the arrangements in place with our skills training agencies. Tertiary education. Madam Speaker, at the tertiary education level, our main goal is to position Trinidad and Tobago as the regional center of excellence in higher education, thus providing an opportunity for economic diversification through the potential export of educational products and services. Building on the past gains of our quality assurance agencies, the Ministry of Education must now emphasize a culture of quality and excellence within the sector, which will transform the tertiary learning institutions, TLI, into world-class institutions which are globally competitive and recognized. TLIs are expected to position themselves to contribute directly to national sustainable development through the acquisition of information on current labor market needs and the trends. In this regard, this sector will address the dearth of labor market information by engaging with providers of the data needed to forecast the future landscape to inform a relevant, responsive tertiary education and skills training sector. Further, these TLIs will move to become the nexus between academia and industry to transform research into commercial opportunities and the products. This will be facilitated through programs such as the University of the West Indies Caribbean Middle Stand program, aimed at developing innovation-driven, export-oriented small and micro enterprises, and will generate foreign exchange and provide employment for a significant percentage of the population. TVET. Madam Speaker, the Ministry of Education recognizes the potential of TVET to contribute to national development. In order to tap into this potential, the Ministry has identified the following areas for attention: rationalization of the sector, standardization of all programs and courses at all levels, ensuring that all TVET providers offer programs that have an adequate mix of theory and practical training, development and implementation of a TVET plan, and the quality assurance framework. Madam Speaker, we continue to emphasize the need for strategic partnerships with our stakeholders at every level. Critical to the success of our schools on a daily basis is the relationship between the ministry and the denominational boards of education. Through the policy paper, we will be looking critically at the roles and functions of the boards in keeping with the tenets of the Concordat and ensuring that our partnership is strengthened to maintain the respect and religious integrity of the denominational schools, while making sure that all parties are meeting the responsibilities to which they are assigned. Madam Speaker, I wish to thank the many stakeholders who contributed to the development of this policy paper. I was gratified by the overwhelming response, and I am confident that this is truly a national document informed by the views passionately put forward by the national community. I am also grateful to the diligent officers of the Ministry of Education who labored over the many drafts of the policy and ultimately brought it to a successful conclusion. Madam Speaker and colleagues, I thank you.
Member for Shoguana, please.
Standing Order 24-4, I'd like to ask a question.
Proceed.
Honourable Minister, it is our expectation that we will see this policy document laid for us today. But the question I'd like to ask you is, having spoken about this national policy document, what skills have you identified through this policy paper that will be introduced at the commencement of the new academic year in September 2019 that will assist in the future competitiveness and the national development of Trinidad and Tobago for the next 50 years?
Minister of Education.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker, and thank you very much, my colleague from Shogunas East. What we have identified today in this paper is really the policy that will drive the education system from 2018 to 2022. In terms of the rolling out of the policy, and that is exactly what I think you are referring to, that rollout has already started, and you're going to see a number of skills, a number of initiatives, a number of things that we are going to put in place and have already put in place so that our education system will continue to flourish. And I can assure you that you're going to see tremendous improvement in the education system. Thank you.
Personal explanations, introduction of bills, under supplemental order paper, the miscellaneous provisions, Registrar General, registration of deeds, conveyancing, and law of property, real property, stamp duty, and the registration of title to Land Bill 2019 in the name of the Attorney General. Motions relating to the business or the sittings of the House and moved by a minister.
Leader of the House.
Thank you very kindly, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, having regard to the interim report of the Joint Select Committee established to consider and report excuse me, on the Trinidad and Tobago Revenue Authority Bill 2018, I beg to move that the committee be allowed an extension to complete its work and submit a final report by May 6, 2019. Thank you very kindly, Madam Speaker.
Honourable members, the question is, be it resolved that the Joint Select Committee established to consider and report on the Trinidad and Tobago Revenue Authority Bill 2018 be allowed an extension to complete its work and submit a final report by May 6, 2019. All in favor say aye. Aye. Any against? I think the ayes have it.
Public business, government business, bills, second reading.
Attorney General.
Madam Speaker, I beg to move that a bill entitled An Act to Provide for the Establishment of the Civil Asset Recovery and Management Agency for the Recovery of Criminal Property through the use of the remedies of restriction in dealings with civil asset restriction and forfeiture of criminal property and the management of criminal property and unexplained wealth orders and matters incidental thereto be now read a second time. Madam Speaker, if ever there was a bill on the floor of the Parliament that signaled what genuine political intention, will, desire, and propriety is, it is this bill. This government has spent nearly 4 years, 3.5 years proper, in developing a robust piece of legislation designed to tackle two particular roots of concern which really go to the cause of where our society is today. Crime is the #1 issue in this country and has been for many years. The safety which people feel has been the subject of written and documented concerns from our independents come forward. Indeed, the Republican Constitution fulminations, the 1962 consultation fulminations on development of where our law went. When you look to those reports, you will see the sustained commentary that our society is concerned about rampant criminality. Criminality has become sophisticated over the years. Criminality is certainly a business, and criminality has profit. Apart from people who engage in crimes of passion, in pure vengeance, crime is profitable. And the mechanism to tackle with crime, the ills associated with crime, certainly involves a square focus on taking the profit out of crime. Madam Speaker, it's no secret that this bill achieves both local concern and international perspective. I'll start with the local concern anchored in what I've just said, the concern against the prosperity in crime, the need for our citizens to feel safe within that enshrined in our constitutional rights in Section 4 of the Constitution. And let's take it now to the fact that in our international obligations, Trinidad and Tobago, being a system of continuing governance, inherited a position where in 2013, we were committed to a course of action under the Financial Action Task Force recommendations, which said that we would undergo the 4th round mutual evaluation in January 2015, which happened, and that we would stand by the results of that process. The Financial Action Task Force reviewed Trinidad and Tobago under the CFATF mechanisms. Under that, suffice it to say, we had a very poor performance. We were told that we had effectively had such serious deficiencies, which Trinidad and Tobago was not prepared to deal with then in January 2015, that we would go into supervision under the Financial Action Task Force mechanisms in the International Cooperation Review Group and also under the CFATF provisions in what is called enhanced follow-up. As we took ourselves along that particular path, in particular, that mutual evaluation report published in 2016, in June 2016, required Trinidad and Tobago to give a high-level government commitment. And as we gave that high-level government commitment, we entered into an action plan over a course of 3 years. That action plan has seen us as a government come to the Parliament with umpteen approaches of legislative reform, and we have taken steps outside of the Parliament to ensure that we better the state and condition, in particular, of our criminal justice system. We have been giving notice to this Parliament since November last year, when we attempted to deal with the income tax legislation amendments, and we informed the country that on the 30th of November 2018, we were required to give certain undertakings, and those undertakings given find us in the production here today. So this bill has a proper position in local context and under international obligation. This bill is tied to the amendments we made recently to cause beneficial ownership discovery in the companies law. It is tied to what this Parliament considered in the House just last Friday in the establishment of a registration system and compliance mechanisms for non-profit organizations. And this is the last piece of law to be dealt with in terms of meeting our obligations. I will say that we are required to present our face-to-face defense of Trinidad and Tobago in the week beginning the 21st of April 2019. That is a matter of days away from now. So, Madam Speaker, let's talk about the bill. The bill before us is designed specifically to meet national perspective, but recommendations 4, 38 of the FATF 40 recommendations, immediate outcomes 2 and 9, effectively where we are required to comply with the consistency approach that all jurisdictions have adopted in ensuring that one can take the profits out of crime in as efficient a fashion as possible. And that, Madam Speaker, involves us as a country endeavoring to comply with the Vienna Convention, the Palermo Convention, the Terrorist Financing Convention, including legislative measures to allow for freezing and forfeiture without prejudicing the rights of third parties. Madam Speaker, my friends opposite in the opposition are not strangers to this type of law. In fact, Madam Speaker, I can tell you that I can tell you that on the occasions that the last cabinet sat under the leadership of Siparia, a piece of legislative proposal was brought by the Ministry of National Security, then under Minister of National Security Gary Griffith. That cabinet decision as to a policy for civil asset forfeiture was withdrawn by dictate from that cabinet on the 20th of March 2014. And if I could paraphrase what Commissioner Griffith, now Commissioner of Police, told me, he was beaten with a big stick to run out the cabinet on this particular legislative reform. So I am stating up front today that I can expect what my friends opposite will say. I know that if in 2014 they ran then Minister of National Security with a proverbial big stick away from the cabinet on the concept of civil asset forfeiture, I know what we are expecting today, and I'm going to signal today that we expect them to come with the constitutionality talk, consultation talk, ask for a joint select committee, ask for more time, and I would like to say, Madam Speaker, right now before we get into the provisions of the bill, there will be a committee of the whole of this Parliament where we will go through clause by clause of the law that is before us. So I am starting off by saying what I expect, because it is my humble submission that those opposite are not intent on supporting laws such as this. Madam Speaker, let's get into the law. Madam Speaker, as Naprima says, I'm right. Madam Speaker, civil asset forfeiture ties into a concept of forfeiture or confiscation of property. In our law, we have post-conviction forfeiture, and we also have pre-conviction forfeiture. I refer specifically to the provisions of the Proceeds of Crime Act. I refer specifically to the provisions of the Anti-Terrorism Act, the Dangerous Drugs Act, and the Anti-Gang Act, to name 4 laws where we have conviction-based forfeiture already on the books of Trinidad and Tobago. Secondly, I point out that under the Proceeds of Crime Act, there is in fact a pre-conviction forfeiture that one can have, particularly with respect to cash, as we see in the provisions of Section 39. And under the Anti-Terrorism Act, under Sections 22B onward, there is the ability for the freezing and seizure of property whereas it relates to terrorist financing and property believed to come from that mechanism. So our law already recognizes the concept of a court engaging in forfeiture of property. Civil asset, however, is a recognized position of law, Madam Speaker, coming from umpteen jurisdictions. And I would like to put onto the record that as a drafting exercise, we considered at least, Madam Speaker, 22 versions of law from different parts of the world. And I want to put it on the record because I've noticed writings and utterings already talking about the novelty of this law. And I would like to say, this law is not that novel. This law is for the brave to pilot and push through, Madam Speaker. So let's go where these laws exist. The United Kingdom Criminal Finances Act, Unexplained Wealth Proceeds of Crime Act, Civil Asset Forfeiture. In Australia, we have several aspects of law. The Australian Commonwealth Proceeds of Crime Act 2002, the Western Australian Criminal Proceeds Confiscation Act 2000, the Northern Territory Criminal Property Forfeiture Act 2002, the New South Wales Criminal Asset Recovery Act 1990 as amended, the South Australia Serious and Organized Crime Unexplained Wealth Act 2009. We then go, Madam Speaker, to the provisions that exist in Canada, and there are a number of provinces that deal with civil forfeiture legislation. They are the Ontario Civil Remedies Act 2001, the British Columbia Civil Forfeiture Act 2005, the Alberta Victims Restitution and Compensation Payment Act 2001, the Saskatchewan Seizure of Criminal Property Act 2009, the Manitoba Criminal Property Forfeiture Act 2004, the Quebec an act respecting the forfeiture, administration, and appropriation of proceeds and instrumentalities of unlawful activity 2007, the New Brunswick Civil Asset Forfeiture Act 2010, the Management of Seized Forfeiture Act 2012, the Nova Scotia Civil Asset Forfeiture 2007 Act. I turn further. The Jamaican experience in their Proceeds of Crime Act 2007, Part 4 as it was amended, St. Vincent and the Grenadines, Proceeds of Crime Act 2013, Part 3 as that was amended, Antigua and Barbuda, Proceeds of Crime Amendment Act 1993 as amended in 2014, in Guyana, the States Asset Recovery Act 2017, in the Cayman Islands, Proceeds of Crime Amendment Law 2016, in the Dominican Republic, Commonwealth of Dominica, the Proceeds of Crime Act 1993, and very importantly, Madam Speaker, I turn to the common law legal system's model legislative provisions on money laundering, terrorism, financing preventative measures, and proceeds of crime. It is a publication coming from 3 entities: the Commonwealth, the United Nations, UNODC, and the IMF. And specifically, in the Model Commonwealth Law, in Part 6 in their publication printed, there is Part 6, a whole regime on civil forfeiture, and then when we go to Part 10, a whole regime on unexplained wealth orders and asset management, etc. So I would like to put on the record that there are umpteen jurisdictions with multiple versions of law with a common thread to treat with civil asset forfeiture. And Madam Speaker, I ask you to note, I have referred to Commonwealth jurisdictions alone. In the continent of Europe, there are umpteen representations of civil law countries that have these mechanisms, and of course they exist elsewhere. So this is a global issue. It might be new for the opposition, but it is a global issue. So Madam Speaker, let's get further into the structures of this law. Now, Madam Speaker, I expect to hear the opposition in the regular statements read by their members when we see it live in action in a short while from prepared speeches. Madam Speaker, I would like to put out that yes, one has to have consideration as to whether this law involves a constitutional perspective. And I state immediately and simply that this law infringes no 3/5 right. There is umpteen evidence, there are umpteen cases which evidence this position in law, which I can take this Honourable Parliament to, which I will most likely have only the full opportunity to treat with in my wrap-up, because I must go through the provisions of the bill. But let me state at the outset, we have considered whether this legislation affects Section 4A, which is the enjoyment of property and the right not to be deprived thereof, except by due process. We considered the provisions of 4B of the Constitution, where the equality before law and the protection of law has to be managed. We've considered sections 5(2)(c), D, and F. C, where we've considered the private life aspects. We've considered 5(2)(f), where we have looked at where someone is charged with a criminal offense, the presumption of innocence, and that one is not to be deemed to be guilty. You are innocent until proven guilty according to law. And Madam Speaker, we have specifically dealt with the active consideration of whether there's an invalidity of law simply because one has a duty as an accused or as a defendant in proceedings to have a burden put upon you to prove a fact. In other words, then, reversal of burden aspects, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I'd like to state in short measure that the legislation certainly has a legitimate aim. The legitimate aim is to be grounded in the concept of due process within the constitutional parameters. It is trite law that due process includes national security and protection issues. This bill is squarely intended to tackle the scourge of crime by taking the profits of crime out of it. Madam Speaker, when we look to the rational connection of the measures that we have adopted to treat with this. The rational provisions are set out in the terms of the bill, which I will come to. Whether we have taken the least draconian steps or the minimal invasive steps will be demonstrated by a reflection on the provisions of the bill, and in the round, the proportional effect within the understanding, both from a common law perspective in umpteen decisions as appear through our courts, Madam Speaker, up to the Privy Council, and I will refer, of course, to R.V. Oakes, to De Freitas, to Bank Milat, to Nyambirai, to Surat, to Francis, to all of these cases which all speak to the elements of proportionality as I have described. And Madam Speaker, of course, I start off by saying Parliament with the presumption of constitutionality, a government so entrusted and so authorized under Section 2 of the Constitution, the supreme law, under Section 53 of the Constitution, to make laws for the peace, order, and good government of Trinidad and Tobago. We are confident that this law is a simple majority piece of law. So, Madam Speaker, let's get to the provisions of the bill, because unfortunately, the time permitted to go through a bill of this kind is not as generous as one could hope it would be. Madam Speaker, the bill is 75 clauses long. It has 3 schedules. It's divided into 8 parts. And what I can tell you, Madam Speaker, Part 1 in clauses 1 to 7 are certain preliminary matters, which I would like to focus upon, definitions in particular, and certain preliminary and fundamental anchorings in the bill. Part 2, which is clauses 8 to 19, is where we treat with the agency which is responsible for managing certain functions of civil asset regime. Part 3, which is clauses 20 to 29, deals with the financial provisions, which are fairly standard. In Part 4, we're dealing with clauses 30 to 32, straight down to clause 57, when we treat with those in the subheads of property restriction order, civil asset forfeiture order, and specific requirements with certain types of property. That is the guts of one main limb of the law. Part 4, we treat with the unexplained wealth orders. Part 6, we deal with property outside of Trinidad and Tobago. And Part 7, we deal with miscellaneous provisions. So let's jump, Madam Speaker, to the provisions of Part 1. Madam Speaker, it's important to note that this bill will, of course, in Section 2, Clause 2, it is to come into effect upon proclamation. Why? We will have to take the steps to establish the agency and certain regulatory requirements that are needed to be put into law. Secondly, very importantly, let's jump to Clause 3. When we look at Clause 3, Madam Speaker, I would like to point out that we have a definition which starts really with what is considered recoverable property. Recoverable property, which is the type of property that civil asset forfeiture is going to operate on, is property of 3 kinds. It's criminal property, it's terrorist property, or it's instrumentalities of crime. And criminal property, when you look at that, Madam Speaker, is property which constitutes a benefit to a person from criminal conduct or represents a benefit in whole or in part, whether directly or indirectly, including economic gain, and which the alleged offender knows or suspects constitutes a benefit. The concept of terrorist property is quite simple, but when we go, Madam Speaker, to an instrumentality of crime,
Could the person with the offender and device just go to the chamber, put it on silent, and continue?
Thank you, Madam Speaker. The instrumentality of crime includes, Madam Speaker, this is an important definition, property used or intended to be used in a manner wholly or in part or in connection with the commission of a criminal offense. Now, Madam Speaker, that is to be measured against what we find in the definition section. We're looking at criminal conduct. Criminal conduct is both for things in Trinidad and outside Trinidad, which would constitute an offense. And Madam Speaker, there are some balances inside of it that I want to flag. Associated property, when we get to listed assets, when we get to reasonable living expenses, Madam Speaker, those come alive when we're looking at the fact that when one can be exposed to a civil asset forfeiture order or an unexplained wealth order, either in the preliminary or final stages, there are certain important balances which say third-party rights cannot be affected. Interest of justice must be balanced inside of this equation, and people must have rights of appearance, of notice, etc., before the thing is treated with. And I would like to specify what I mean by the thing. Importantly, Madam Speaker, I point you in clause 3 to clause 4. This law applies to all recoverable property. That's the three things. Even property prior to the commencement of the act. Why? Because crimes may be of a continuing nature. So this has potential to go into operation for offenses that existed prior to the law. Is that a retrospectivity issue within a constitutional R.V. Leonage perspective? No, it is not, Madam Speaker, and that is trite law. Secondly, clause 5, the standard of proof, and this is important, in any question under this act, the standard of proof required is whether recoverable property should be subject to asset recovery shall be that applicable to civil proceedings. That is a balance of probabilities. Why? Because clause 6 now bites in. A property restriction order in subclause 1 and subclause 2, a civil asset forfeiture order, is against property only. And it is described in law as an in rem matter, not against a person, which is an in personam matter. That drives to constitutionality as it relates to whether a person, as opposed to a thing, is being treated by a process. And let me explain that. You can treat a thing by way of forfeiture under a civil asset regime differently from a person. In the criminal law, you're treating with an offense against a person, a legal entity, a natural individual, whomever it may be. That's against a person. It is at that point that the constitutional requirements of innocent until proven guilty, of due process, further provisions, of rights against self-incrimination, all of those things arrive for consideration in an in personam argument. They do not arise on a forfeiture of a thing. So when a civil asset order, a property restriction order, or a civil asset forfeiture order comes in, the claim is intituled against a thing. PBD 6303. If you're seizing the car with that registration, the property is situate at X address. That is how the action is going to be intituled, because it's against the thing. Madam Speaker, very importantly in clause 7, we're saying that recoverable property can actually flow through hands. And we bring to life the concept of the equity of tracing as it has existed in the common law, as it exists under the Proceeds of Crime Act. In particular, if you look to sections 32 onward of the Proceeds of Crime Act. But Madam Speaker, we then provide for the safeguards. We separate out the understanding of mixed property. We separate out the understanding of where property is no longer recoverable. And importantly, Madam Speaker, when you look to subclause 9, where a person holds recoverable property and is able to satisfy a court on a balance of probabilities that the property was obtained in good faith for value without notice that it was recoverable property, the property ceases to be recoverable. So, Madam Speaker, the common law equity provision hailed as sanctity in our law, where a bona fide purchaser for value without notice is not affected, is enshrined in this law. Effectively, let me translate this. It means that it is only people that have criminal conduct that have to be concerned about this, Madam Speaker. And I'd like to stick a pin. The vast majority of people in this country, the very vast majority of people are PAYE people. They pay in as they're earning under income tax law because they are employed, Madam Speaker. And there is an easy and rational connection between their wealth and their assets. That is not the case, however, with the bandit on the corner, with gold chain wearing men that don't have a job all day long, driving Mercedes-Benz and BMWs. That is not the case with people that have umpteen assets that they cannot explain, or where they're hiding their assets by not declaring who they actually are, where they're putting it under trusts or other arrangements. Those people are people who have a few things to dot their I's and cross their T's in a court of law about, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, Clause 8 is where, Madam Speaker, what's the precise time to end? 3:14. Thank you. That's full time, yes? Much obliged. Madam Speaker, Clause 8 is where we establish the agency. This Civil Asset Recovery Management Agency has a role. Number one, it receives the assets in its agency manager. Number two, it falls to be managed under trusteeship provisions. Number three, it is the entity which the Director of Public Prosecutions can ask to receive an investigation, and that agency can approach a court for a civil asset forfeiture order, Madam Speaker. That agency, therefore, is required to be insulated from public mischief. It ought to be insulated from ministerial intervention, and that is why we say, Madam Speaker, 3 people are the trustees. The civil asset trustee and 2 deputies. The civil asset trustee and one of the deputies must both be attorneys at law appointed by the Judicial and Legal Services Commission. The 3rd person, Madam Speaker, is to be appointed upon the agreement of the Leader of the Opposition and the Prime Minister, and if they can't agree, it is to be done by the President after considering those positions in his or her own discretion. Madam Speaker, we then go on to provide the protections for the trustee. We say that the trustee is to be immune from suit, criminal and civil. We say that the trustee, for acting in good faith, is to be immune from liability. We provide for the oath of secrecy. We deal with the declaration of conflicts of interest and the non-participation in a small society such as ours. That is, of course, to be expected. Madam Speaker, we then deal with the revocation of these posts and positions. We have set out the best-in-class constitutional arrangement, but very importantly, we make sure that their terms and conditions cannot be derogated away from their best benefit as it is entrenched under Section 141 of the Constitution and the other provisions of the Constitution for protection. In other words, then, we have ranked these people exactly from protection point of view as we would a judge of a high court, a judge sitting in Superior Court of Record, so that they will never be beholden unto political influence, as the R.V. Hines case has so clearly set out so many years ago, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, in exercising functions, we have described what the functions and powers are at Clause 14 of the bill. And Madam Speaker, 1516 is immunity, disclosure of interest, immunity of trustee, property manager, having discretion aspects. Madam Speaker, Clause 17, where we put this property manager in whom there is a vesting function. The court vests property in the property manager. Just like a court would vest a judicial receiver, a person acting for judicial management, that person becomes seized by way of a court order which transfers the ownership of a thing across to that person. And what we say here, that property manager must be appointed by the President in his or her own discretion. And I ask you to look at Section 80 of the Constitution as to why we do that. Madam Speaker, 18, liability of property manager. 19, staff and expertise of the agency. We make sure that this agency is subjected to the best provisions when we come to Part 3, financial provisions. We allow them, Madam Speaker, to manage the Civil Asset Recovery and Management Fund. And this fund, Madam Speaker, finds umpteen precedents, be they in the Asset Recovery Information Management Coalition and Corroboration and Cooperation aspects broadly internationally. We have a CARIN network, we have an ARIN network, we have a Seized Asset Committee with similar purpose under Section 58 and 58A of the Proceeds of Crime Act. But Madam Speaker, when we're looking at this fund, we're saying where they get their money from Parliament, from management of assets, etc., from loans, from agency, etc., and what these things are to be dealt with. Those are clauses 21 and 22, Madam Speaker. We deal with the estimate of expenditure. We deal with the financial year end. We deal with accounts being subjected to the scrutiny of the Auditor General, of course, with similarities under the constitutional arrangements. We put best-in-class IFRS reporting standards for accounting. Madam Speaker, we deal with borrowings of the government, laying of annual reports. So let's get down now to Clause 29, which is realized proceeds. Madam Speaker, this agency has an order of priority for using realized proceeds. It's important, just like you would have in judicial management or receivers, that you establish the order of priority. Clause 29 treats with that. Firstly, which payments are required by virtue of Section 48. Next, payment of legal expenses, fees of liquidator, receiver, and then the rest of the funds flow into the agency. Madam Speaker, we get now to the nuts and bolts of this. Let's go to Part 4, the civil asset recovery. Clause 30, 31, 32, 33, and 34 are of important measure. Madam Speaker, 31 says, if Napri Mansipari could just keep it down. 31 says, where during the course of a criminal investigation, a police officer, a customs officer, or the chairman of the Board of Inland Revenue has reasonable grounds to suspect that the offense involves recoverable property, you can forward a report to the DPP. Next, where the DPP is of the view that you're not going because there's an insufficiency of criminal evidence for criminal charges, but that it in fact involves recoverable property, the DPP can tell the agency, go to the High Court and ask for the High Court to consider an initial order and then a further order, which is a subsequent order. 32. Before you go there, the agency is required to make sure that there's a valuation of this, that the equity is ascertained. What's the value of the property? Has it been assessed by an independent standard, etc.? And at clause 33 is where the application comes in. The agency, that insulated entity in which there is no political interference, cloistered in the same manner as which judges are, that agency applies for a property restriction order under the provisions of 33. The trustee must make an application in a prescribed format. It may be done ex parte, i.e. by itself, and it may be done in camera. But very importantly, clause 34 says that there are reasonable grounds to believe that the property is recoverable property. And Madam Speaker, there's a wide range of case law, and there are comparatives to be found in the Proceeds of Crime Act in section 32 to 34 in particular, where we deal with reasonable suspicion, reasonable grounds for belief, and this is well traversed in law, but in particular by certain cases that we have, and I'd like to put that on the record quickly. When we look to the cases of, firstly, that in Antigua and Barbuda, Ahmed Williams and the Supervisory Authority, that is in the Eastern Caribbean Supreme Court in their hearing on the 17th of February 28th and July 13th, 2017. Also, very importantly, Madam Speaker, in a very now significant case, that is the National Crime Agency and Mrs. A in the United Kingdom, where the first unexplained wealth order was traversed in a Harrods case with millions of pounds there, and I'll come to that. Madam Speaker, what we do is very importantly, we say that if you get this property restriction order by the agency's application after the DPP's direction, then you have 14 days and you must go and tell the other side. After you tell the other side, you then have the court being able to make any order in the interest of justice. It can be discharged, it can be amended. We very importantly provide that those orders can provide for reasonable living expenses, legal fees, management, etc. That was born in the case law coming out of Mariva injunction law. It was anchored into the Anti-Terrorism Act, into the Proceeds of Crime Act, etc. It's trite law that exceptions must be made for third-party interests. But Madam Speaker, very importantly, when we look to the provisions coming a little bit further, we look to the assets of exception not applying if you have other property that can look after you. And importantly, Madam Speaker, we must look to value for money and preservation of the assets to avoid the doctrine of wasting, which is again a very well-known concept of equity in how we treat with assets when they are under control. Madam Speaker, clause 35 treats with variation or setting aside of property restriction orders. We then deal with the right to hearing, exclusion, etc. And Madam Speaker, Importantly, Clause 37 treats with third-party rights. And I'll put it quite simply. If you have a legal or equitable interest in the property, and if you are deprived of it, etc., we make sure to carve out in this law that the court can listen to you, provide the relief for you. You have the due process preservation. You have the right of fair hearing aspects. You have the right of variation of that interim order before it is made final. And Madam Speaker, what we do very importantly is we limit the life of this order, as you'll see in Clause 39, to 90 days. So, as the interim order is made, you have 14 days to serve it. All third-party rights are heard, due process happens. Clause 39 says the order will only survive for 90 days unless the court treats with it further, or, Madam Speaker, if it is discharged. And we give specifically the third-party rights. And then we go through in the rest of the clauses how you must give notice, who you must give notice to, the right effectively of the interest of justice argument prevailing, so that you don't exclude unwittingly a class of persons who may be affected by this kind of law. We deal with the enforcement provisions abroad. And Madam Speaker, at the committee stage, I will in fact propose that we consider an application of this law, a broadening of Section 34 in particular, to include people who have absconded from the jurisdiction and people who are dead. Why? There are people who have left this country owing money, having engaged in criminal activity, who are in non-extraditable jurisdictions like Panama, I will say openly, who ought to find themselves the subject of this law. Madam Speaker, of course, you must put in the compensation requirements as we have in Clause 43, because if you are put out by way of the order of the court, you should very much have the right of compensation. Civil asset forfeiture order, Clause 44 onward. Madam Speaker, Clause 44 is where the agency applies for the High Court to go into a civil asset forfeiture order. Again, we specify it as a right in rem, meaning there's no person involved, so there's no issue of the criminal law applying. This is civil law application within the construct of the many judgments that exist around the Commonwealth to say civil law is different from criminal law. And the concept of treating with property via civil law is well known. It is in the common law. It can actually happen. The freezing leading to forfeiture can happen in the process of Mareva injunctions in particular, even where penalty clauses are put to ensure compliance of orders from the civil clause. Madam Speaker, we deal with the applications for the orders. We deal with the grant of a civil asset forfeiture order in Clause 45. And here is where we say what the court must be satisfied with, Madam Speaker. And we set out what the grounds are for the court to grant this order in final form on an inter partes basis, meaning both parties must be heard, and third parties with full invitation. We make the exceptions for payment, for living expenses, for rent, for mortgage, for whatever it may be. We then treat with the assets in the case of death or distance. And Madam Speaker, when we deal with the agency being vested in Clause 46, we deal with the notice of the grant of the order and making sure that it is publicly known so that there's a wide circulation before that property in a court process is treated with in conclusive form. Madam Speaker, we then treat with the different variations. There are obviously rights of preemption in the company's law perspective. We deal with those iterations that have to be managed. Madam Speaker, I want to come because time is short. Passing through straight down to specific requirements of certain types of property. We disaggregate the interest between real property. We, of course, allow for the phenomenon of lispendence and registration of interest via the registrar. We deal with vessels, meaning ships, in the person in charge of that supervisory function, and we deal with motor vehicles. We have to deal with those three species of property. We deal with cash in bank accounts, Madam Speaker. We deal with companies, and we deal with listed assets, Madam Speaker. Let's get to Part 5, as time is short. Unexplained wealth orders, Part 5. Madam Speaker, this is the dynamite provision of the law. Madam Speaker, I invite honorable members to read in particular the Antigua and Barbuda case of Ahmed Williams and the Supervisory Authority, and very importantly, the Honorable Mr. Justice Superstone in the National Crime Agency and Mrs. A And these two judgments, I don't have the time to go through them, I'll deal with them in wrap-up. These two judgments treat with the propriety of civil asset forfeiture being entirely constitutional, being entirely different from a criminal process, and the fact that your assets can be treated with in a way to separate you from them by due process in a constitutional way. Unexplained wealth orders. What this basically says is, Chairman of Board of Inland Revenue, Customs and Excise Officer or Police Officer, responsible for financial investigations if there is a reasonable suspicion that the total wealth excludes or exceeds the value of lawfully obtained wealth and the property is owned by the respondent who is under his effective control. Those three entities, Madam Speaker, may apply to the court in writing for an order asking for a preliminary unexplained wealth order. And then we go through the particulars of what must be set out.
Just want to advise all members, if they could put away their devices and ensure that their devices on silent.
Thanks, Madam Speaker. 3 minutes I have left. The unexplained wealth order provision has immediate precedence in Section 32 of the Proceeds of Crime Act. There are grounds set out there. The unexplained wealth order is where St. Vincent and the Grenadines have reported that their once gold-wearing, blinging bandits on the street no longer parade upside and inside of any place across their country, enticing young people to join a gang activity because they realize that they will face the hurdle of unexplained wealth orders. These unexplained wealth orders are done in a due process environment. They have been the subject of case law which determines them to be constitutional. Madam Speaker, the grant of the unexplained wealth order leads to a potential forfeiture, again in a due process environment, after notice is given, where the defendant has an opportunity to traverse the case against him. And what we do in this particular case is we call upon the defendant to explain his wealth. That, as I mentioned in Section 5 of the Constitution, is not an obligation which is unknown to our existing law. The fact that a defendant has to prove a fact is entirely constitutional. And who better to explain how you bought your house, how you have a mansion worth X or Y, how you have a car, and who better to explain that, Madam Speaker, than the person that owns it, Madam Speaker? Because not everybody is brave enough to leave their name on a record for full public inspection. Madam Speaker, the rest of it, property outside of Trinidad and Tobago, in clauses 68 onward, we treat with. And Madam Speaker, in the miscellaneous provisions, we deal with the harmonization of the consequential amendments to the Proceeds of Crime Act, etc. But Madam Speaker, I'd like to say, as I come to a quick conclusion, there not being enough time. This law went through 2.5 years of consultation. The Law Association in particular, we waited on their comments for 10 months straight. We made sure that it made the round. There are 5,000 attorneys at law on the record, and every last one of them registered with the Law Association received this bill. 10 months after agitating the Law Association in particular, after dealing with the Director of Public Prosecutions, the Criminal Justice Advisor, the people that drafted the laws for St. Vincent and Grenadines, the UK experts that assisted us in this law, dealing with the Financial Action Task Force, the UNODC, the IMF, after dealing with all of these laws and looking at the constitutionality of this law, Madam Speaker, this law today defines which side of the fence you are on. This law gives Trinidad and Tobago a chance to take the proceeds of crime, and I beg to move.
Honourable members, I shall now propose the question for debate. The question is that a bill entitled An Act to Provide for the Establishment of the Civil Asset Recovery and Management Agency for the Recovery of Criminal Property through the use of remedies of restriction in dealing with civil asset restriction and forfeiture of criminal property and the management of criminal property and unexplained wealth orders and matters incidental thereto be now read a second time. Member for Caroni Central.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Attorney General, before I start, I just want to ask you a question based on what you just said, which is, did you mean that the Law Association responded, did not respond, or what? I didn't quite understand.
Written comments after 10 months of requesting them because they asked for numerous occasions to extend the time. They wanted an ample opportunity, so we literally waited 10 months for them, and we only brought this bill after we had received their comments and made adjustments in line with their comments.
Thank you very much for the answer, Attorney General. Madam Speaker, I listened to the Attorney General, and I am not a lawyer, as you know, so I will not deal with the fine points of the law. But I do want to respond to some of the issues, and I want to raise some issues of my own. The Attorney General said that he spent 4 years to address two particular roots of concern: the reality of crime as a business, and I want to say that I agree with the Attorney General that crime is a business, and this is a matter that should be addressed. And secondly, that he wanted to take the profits out of crime. And I want to say as well that I agree with him on that approach. I don't think that people should be engaged in any manner of criminal conduct, benefit from it, and simply proceed in the society as if it were okay. And I want to say that I fully agree with those things. But there are issues in the bill that we need to take into account, Madam Speaker. For instance, the standard of proof in this legislation is an issue that requires some attention, and I think is cause for concern. I think many of my colleagues on this side would agree that the standard of proof is quite low, and there is a burden on the citizen to prove his or her innocence that is quite great. Now, the Attorney General did refer to that in his presentation, indicating that there was no violation of constitutionality. And perhaps that is so. But I think that there is an issue here that we need to interrogate. Normally, when you go before a court of law, the level of proof that you require is beyond a reasonable doubt. That does not appear in this. And I understand the difference. Although I'm not a lawyer, I understand the difference between civil and criminal proceedings. So we do not have that issue here. There's also the concept of clear and convincing evidence. That does not appear in this bill at all. So the standard of proof is lower than these two. Then there is a concept of preponderance of evidence. That is not existent in this law either. And what we have here is really a situation in which in 58(1) of the bill talks about reasonable suspicion. So it goes even beyond probable cause and talks about reasonable suspicion, and I want to look at that for a minute. Clause 58. It says here, Part 5, Unexplained Wealth Orders. Where the chairman of the Board of Inland Revenue, a customs and excise officer, or police officer attached to the branch of the police service responsible for a financial investigation, reasonable suspects that the total wealth of the respondent exceeds the value of his lawfully obtained wealth, and the property is owned by the respondent or is under his effective control, he may apply to the High Court in writing for an order, and then it proceeds with that. So, in my view, there is a low standard of proof requirement. And I want to ask the Attorney General, given his articulation on position on the bill, whether that is the best that we can do in this bill, and whether it is right to keep the bar so low in a bill as important and as significant in its implications as this. So that's my first question. This law also concentrates on the property, not the owner. The Attorney General was at pains to say that on a number of occasions. And it is my view that the innocence of the owner can be lost in such an approach. Now, I have raised here in relation to other bills the fact that the presumption of innocence before guilt is very important. And you cannot write legislation on the assumption that everybody is guilty. And I want to look at Clause 6 of this particular bill to see what it says. Clause 6 says, a property restriction order under this Act is an order in rem against property believed to be criminal property, terrorist property, or instrumentalities of crime. A civil asset forfeiture order made under this Act is an order in rem against property, which is criminal property, terrorist property, etc. So this Clause 6 is the one that relates to it. Now, what this does, in fact, Madam Speaker, is that it makes provision for a person's property to be taken away, even if a person is not guilty of a crime. Okay? So the separation of the property from the person who might own the property creates the conditions in which the AG is asking and explaining to us that it's as admissible in law to seize the property even though no crime has been proven against the individual. And I want to ask Attorney General, is it reasonable to label something as a criminal property when the property deemed criminal property is not aligned to a criminal prosecution and conviction? The third point that I want to make in asking the question has to do with the establishment of an agency, the Civil Asset Recovery and Management Agency, which the AG talked about. Now, what is the job of this agency? The job of this agency is to manage the seizure and disposal of property deemed to be criminal, terrorist, or an instrumentality under this Act. The first thing I want to ask is whether, given this law and given the public procurement law, which also has to do with the disposal of property, whether the process identified in here in the law for disposal of property is also covered by the procurement law, the aspect of disposal of property in that procurement law. And I feel it's important to ask for that because the procurement law asks for a certain orderly process of disposal of law. And one of the things that I'm going to raise here as we look at other jurisdictions is the fact that the forfeiture could be used even by an agency that is said to be insulated, as the AG raises. That agency could, in fact, be an agency that is given to an accumulation of property. So I want to look at Clause 8 here in the bill, which deals with this matter. there is hereby established an agency to be known as the Civil Asset Recovery and Management Agency, hereinafter referred to as the agency, which shall be responsible for the recovery, management, and disposal of criminal property or terrorist property or an instrumentality under this act. And then it goes on to explain how it will be constituted in the rest of the pages. Now, when we look at instrumentality on page 22, we see that instrumentality of crime or instrumentalities includes, and then it defines what it includes, any property used or intended to be used in a manner wholly or in part in or in connection with the commission of a criminal offense. And B, property that is used, intended, or allocated for use in financing of terrorism and terrorist acts by terrorist organization. But by the very fact that it says includes, it means that it can be more than these two things identified here. And therefore, it gives a wide range of jurisdictional opportunity to the agency. And I wonder if this wide perspective is what the Attorney General wishes to have in this particular bill. Now, we have a problem with clause 31.2 when you take it together with 31.1 and 33.5 and 34.1a and b and 35.2. What do all of these add up to? Let us look at 31.1. 31.1 says, where during the course of a criminal investigation, a police officer, customs officer, or the chairman of the Board of Inland Revenue has reasonable grounds to suspect that the offense involves recoverable property, he may forward an investigative report to the Director of Public Prosecutions. Then 31.1, page 39. Sorry, no, 33.1, sorry. Upon referral of a matter by the Director of Public Prosecutions under Section 31, the agency shall apply to the High Court in the prescribed form for an order to be known as a an order to be known as a property restriction order to prohibit a person from dealing with the recoverable property until such time as an application can be made to forfeit it, the recoverable property under this act. And then at 33.5, it says an application under subsection 1 or 2 may be made ex parte without notice. So it means, Madam Speaker, that you can do this without the knowledge of the person. The confiscation of this property can be done without the knowledge of the person. And then you have 34.1, where an application is made under 33.1 and the High Court is satisfied that there are reasonable grounds that the property to which the application raises recoverable property or associated property, and it goes on. Now, how is this to be determined, Madam Speaker, if the Director of Public Prosecutions has not yet determined what action he will take? I feel that there are real problems with the contradictory intention of these particular clauses. And I would ask the AG to please look at them again to see whether I am right, or, as he may well tell me, I have nothing to worry about and I am making a mistake. So 34.1 A and B, did I deal with that. A and B, okay. And 35.2. Before varying or setting aside a property restriction order, the High Court shall give any person or who may be affected by its decision an opportunity to be heard. And I'm raising this one because it also is linked to the ex parte injunction, basically, the ex parte decision. So you have a right to be heard, but you have the matter being heard ex parte. What do all of these add up to? And are there, in fact, contradictions in this bill that we have to be concerned about that deprive the individual who is affected of rights that he may normally, as a citizen, be entitled to? Now, if you look at 45, clause 45, and the way criminal property is defined. Criminal property, it is not necessary to show that the property is derived directly or indirectly, in whole or in part, from a particular offense, or that any person has been charged in relation to the particular offense, only that it is criminal property. And it goes on to be explained, to be identified, to be elaborated on pages 50 and 51. So the person is not a convicted criminal, but the property is determined as being criminal property. And I think that there is some explanation that we need to have or understand or appreciate. And given the low bar that I mentioned in terms of proof, I think it is important to address this particular situation. We are also concerned that the issue of rights is hardly mentioned in the bill. And the first time that it's really mentioned is on, it perhaps will not be, perhaps is not the first time, but the first time it strikes you is in 48.7a, the rights of any person who holds the associated property or who is the accepted joint owner, etc. So that is for the person who might be affected in a situation in which someone else is having his property confiscated, but the other person has rights to the property. Now, does this bill take into account properly the human and civil rights of individuals and the rights to property ownership? Now, I know that the Attorney General took in front and he raised those issues and indicated to us that he, in fact, has properly addressed these things. But when I look at this carefully, I am not sure that it does, Madam Speaker, because it too easily moves into the court without any criminal action into the individual or against the individual, identifying the property as criminal property and then taking it into the court in order to confiscate the property. The other issue I think that we ordinary citizens, I think, would have concern about is the retroactive nature of this bill and where it leaves an innocent, unsuspecting owner. I know that there is a provision in the bill where you can go to court and explain that you are innocent in the process, that you had no original knowledge, that you had no knowledge of the situation and you simply bought the property. But I am not sure that it is reasonable to ask somebody to do that. If you have a property that has changed hands over 4 or 5 people, 6 people, and you find yourself somewhere in the middle there, or maybe the end user, I mean, how do you know? Do you go and search all of these things to find out if this property is a criminal property before you buy it? I mean, you know how many people in this country, if this were the law, could be locked up for this? Because you end up buying the property without investigating. You don't do the investigation. Your lawyers wouldn't search that. They'll search the title. They will not search the criminality of the owner. And therefore, this is an issue, I think, that one needs to be careful about. Suppose you inherit a property, Madam Speaker, and the person whom you inherited it from bought it without knowledge, or even with knowledge that it was a property that came out of criminal hands, but you do not know. Would you be penalized for that process? And I think one has to be careful how you manage the law. I mean, you cannot write the law even though you want to deal with the guilty. You also have to write the law to deal with the guilty, but to protect the innocent. Now, the acquisition of property before this law is passed is now subject to this law. Madam Speaker, the Attorney General, in fact, mentioned that in his own presentation. And I think that could be very, very problematic. If you have a situation in which a property was bought many years before the passing of this law, when you buy the property, you bought it under the existing laws at that time. Or when transactions took place before this law, they took place under the laws of this time, of that time. Can you now pass a law and on the basis of this new law begin to apply the law to a time when the law did not exist? And therefore, during the period when you acquired the property, no laws would have been broken, Madam Speaker. I think we have to be a little more thoughtful about this. I'm not saying that you didn't think about it, but no, you could reply. I hope you will reply. But if somebody, I mean, we had a famous, anyway, I don't want to use examples that, yeah, I don't want to perhaps use examples that might be disconcerting. So the main point I'm making, you pass a law today, somebody 20 or 30 or 10 years ago acquired a property, or 5 or 6 different people had change of hands of property until it got to you. All of them having bought the property before it got to you. And you having bought the property before this particular law. And all the transactions were done legally. How do you then become a criminal under this law? The property is. Well, you will explain that then. Now, given some of those issues that I've raised, Attorney General, should not this bill require a constitutional majority, 3/5? Because we are talking here about retroactivity, we are talking here about the rights of the individual, we are talking here about the rights of property. And I believe that the Attorney General is being, what can I say, too cavalier in taking the position that no constitutional rights are being violated here, that the requirements of the Trinidad and Tobago Constitution are fully taken into account. And I believe that this law requires a 3/5 majority, and I think my colleagues on this side would agree with me. Now, can you justify a simple majority, which is what the AG did, on the grounds that the bill involves civil proceedings, which is what he argued, and is focused on property, not individuals? can you cavalierly say that that is the argument that allows you to do that? I don't think so. I think that could be tested. Who is affected by property confiscation, Madam Speaker? Who is affected by the seizure of property? Is it not the individual? Is it not the person, the family, the reputation of the person? And I don't think you could just say that because it is done by civil proceedings, calling it a criminal property, that you could do that just so and come here and pass a bill by simple majority. I don't feel it can be done like that. Are you seeking to justify a simple majority Attorney General on the grounds that the property can only be seized after a judicial process? Is the AG saying that because it goes to the court and therefore it is subject to a judicial process based on this minimum standard of reasonable suspicion, that it does not require a constitutional majority here in the Parliament? I think that a citizen, Madam Speaker, should have more protection on this, because the question needs to be asked whether the process, though subject to the court, can be abused. And the question of abuse does arise. I am sure that the Attorney General sought to put in the necessary provisions to prevent abuse. He talked about the way the agency is set up. He talked about the protection under the court for the person who is the third party. And I am sure that he was very mindful of those things when he was doing and writing and organizing this piece of legislation. But you have to take this issue of reasonable suspicion and the fact that you are taking the matter to court, and you can't justify that and say that because it is going to court that it is simply a simple majority piece of legislation. How come the Proceeds of Crime Act required a 3/5 majority, Madam Speaker? And this bill, which seeks to seize property, does not. I have a problem with that. And you can't tell me one is the property and one is the person, and that is the difference. In many states in the United States, Madam Speaker, I know that he used Commonwealth jurisdiction, and in this Bill Essentials, they use the Commonwealth countries of New Zealand and Canada and Australia, etc. I know that. And he used some of the Caribbean islands as well. In many states in the US, they have increased the standards of proof to require proven criminal guilt before assets forfeiture can take place. And this is a fact of life, and I will demonstrate it. You have a situation here with the chairman of the BIR. I have no doubt that every chairman of the BIR will be above board and above suspicion. But we have had many attempts here with different legislation which the opposition had to challenge successfully for information from the BIR being accessible outside of the jurisdiction of the BIR. That is a matter that has come up in the legislation here. We have protested vehemently on these. I could think of the Tax Information Treaty Amendment Bill. I could think of the FATCA bill. All right, I am sure it's going to come up again in others. You have a situation of customs and excise officer. If you ask any of the members opposite, including the Minister of Finance, he would tell you, if he doesn't want to speak in the Parliament, he may tell you quietly that one of the reasons that they want to create another institution, you remember the House, aren't you? So I'm not making any controversy, man. I'm just making a point. One of the reasons they want to establish a new institution to deal with customs and other institutions is because they feel that there exists within the customs and excise division a certain amount of corrupt activity. They will tell you that. And these are the people now.
Honourable Member for Caroni Central, your original 30 minutes suspend. You're entitled to 15 more minutes to wind up. Are you availing yourself of it? And honourable members, can we agree to take the suspension on the completion? It'll be just 4 minutes after. Please proceed.
So here you have an institution which itself is under suspicion, now in charge of determining that you are under suspicion and bringing you to court. And then you have police officer. Yes, they are in charge in investigation, but I have made this point in relation to another bill. If you're going to give this kind of authority to somebody in the police service, give the authority to the Commissioner of Police, because he has constitutional authority. And let him pass on to whichever officers now accountable to him who can do these things, whether they are investigation officer or whatever it is. When you look at the civil asset trustee, yes, some attempt is made to have jurisdiction of the judiciary, and then you have the leader of the opposition and the prime minister. But I don't know if that is enough insulation. And then the property manager has the powers of a receiver. And they all have, under this bill, Madam Speaker, immunity basically from any kind of challenge or prosecution, you know. That agency has complete authority and control. But then you have the other issue where the Minister of Finance is involved in a key role, 34, and although the institution properly accounts to Parliament, the Minister of Finance does have jurisdiction over the authority and does provide actual direct financing to the institution. So the political insulation that you talk about, I'm not talking about this Minister of Finance, but any minister who is involved. If you want political insulation, you have to make up your mind that you cannot have a situation in which the institution can be, in fact, subject to any kind of political influence. So I was talking about the United States jurisdictions, Madam Speaker, and the fact that they have changed a number of things. In many states, I'm reading here from a document, I will let the Hansard know what it is, legis brief. And it says, in many states, the standard of proof is a preponderance of evidence, okay, which is higher than we have here. And in many others, proof not only of a preponderance of evidence, a clear and convincing evidence, making it more difficult to seize property. Then it says that states are working to clarify and protect the rights of property owners by improving the process. All right, opponents of civil asset forfeiture laws cite a heightened risk for abuse because in many states, law enforcement have the incentive to seize property as they receive some or all of the proceeds from the sale. This institution here, the agency, is not insulated from this, you know, Madam Speaker. It can become a law unto itself. It could become a property owner. And under political influence, it can become a very, very problematic institution because all kinds of things have happened in this country. I think you know that from the transfer of ownership of state lands to individual people, to the transfer of other assets to individual people in the process of political influence. And I'm not talking about any individual or anything like that. And then in the HR 5212, which is a piece of law, I wanted to get one piece here, though, which had to do with the fact that in certain territories, they have made it absolutely necessary that the proof that is required is criminal conviction before you could seize the asset. 9 states in the United States. I cannot find the paragraph here now, although it's only 2 pages, but I can tell you in 9 states in the United States, the burden of proof, the trigger is criminal conviction of the individual before you can go. And then in this Civil Asset Forfeiture Act, Reform Act 2014, you can see here what they are doing. In paragraph 1, by striking by a preponderance of evidence and inserting by clear and convincing evidence. So they are increasing the bar. Over here, where a prima facie case is made for such a defense, the government has the burden of proving that the claimant knew or reasonably should have known that the property was involved in illegal conduct giving rise to the forfeiture. So you have to prove foreknowledge before you can take the property. And in making this determination, the court shall consider such factors as the seriousness of offense and so on. And all right. The piece that I wanted to get, thanks to my colleague here, the member for Chaguanas East. In the last 2 years, Arizona, Iowa, and Virginia enacted laws changing the government's burden of proof from a preponderance to clear and convincing, and making it more difficult to seize property. That wasn't the one I was looking for. It's the one where the 9 states have, in fact, taken the burden of proof as being a criminal conviction in the thing. Now, as I said, the Proceeds of Crime Act require, now, I will go on, Madam Speaker, because I know I have limited time now. Is the bar for the standard of proof too low? And should it not be raised? I want to ask the Attorney General that. Is it unreasonable to argue that initiation of proceedings to restrict access to property or to confiscate property should be after conviction for a crime and not on suspicion? Now, secondly, are the various definitions, especially under Clause 4, which is the interpretation section, are they too wide? Are the powers not too arbitrary? And can they not be subject to abuse? And I've illustrated how they can be abused. And does this law not allow violation of due process? Is this law, as it is, not subject to potential political abuse? When one takes into account retroactivity-related bills like the evidence bill and retroactivity and related bills like the evidence bill and others, where as an opposition we've had to fight for secrecy for the BIR, to restrict the potential for abuse by police operatives, and for protection against violation of human rights and privacy rights against citizens, as well as property rights. Can't you see here, Attorney General, the potential for the abuse, notwithstanding the fact that we agree with you that you intended, in fact, to insulate this particular institution? Should we not be cautious about this? And does this law, therefore, not violate essential constitutional protection? Now, the AG talks about proportionality and justice and so on. And I have a case here on my phone in the United States in which a convicted petty criminal involved in drugs was disproportionately, in the view of the judge, had his property taken away from him, in addition to a jail sentence and a fine that he received. And when the matter was appealed in court, the judge ruled that even though he was a convicted criminal, that there had to be some proportionality between the nature of the crime and the command you were taking of the person's assets. And just to save time, I don't want to go and read it now. But again, that is an issue, but we are dealing here not with criminals, but people who are not, in fact, convicted at all. Now, I understand that this is meant to be a good piece of law that protects the innocent from the guilty. I know that it has to do with drugs and guns and violence and money laundering, crime, terrorism, corruption, hidden and protected assets, etc. Now, I know that this is also the situation that led to this kind of legislation the world over. And you had a situation that in which you had to find other ways of getting criminals that you could not ordinarily get given the existing law. I understand all that. I recognize the Attorney General's position on several occasions here when he came and said, you know, they didn't get Al Capone on criminal charges for the murder of people or the conduct of criminal activity. They got him on tax evasion. I understand that. I also understand that in the case of Dole Chedi in Trinidad, he was convicted for murder and not for any of the crimes that he committed allegedly related to the notion of drugs and drug trafficking and those kinds of things. I know that this is an issue, but I think we have to be, I also know that there's a compliance issue with the Europeans and the European requirement to allow us to be part of a set of civilized nations in terms of the way you manage your financial system and the way you manage your financial and economic system. I know all of that. And I know we have to get off the blacklist. All right? The AG never mentioned this, but this is one of the issues. We have to get off the blacklist. I know that. I understand all of that. But that does not mean we have to violate the rights of individuals. That does not mean we have to take away people's property just so. That does not mean that you have to have a bill with such overreaching powers and overpowering clauses that you basically put the ordinary person at a disadvantage. Now, the AG said, if you are an innocent person, you don't have to worry about this bill because this bill is only for criminals. But the problem with bills like this, and the problem of the potential for political interference, and the problem of the potential of manipulation by officials who have the power, and the potential for agencies such as we are establishing here for becoming self-serving institutions in their own right. Reality, life, the experience, the cases that we know tell us that these things do happen, Madam Speaker. And therefore, you have to always write legislation for the innocent, to protect the innocent. You cannot allow a person who is innocent to find himself in a situation, him or her, all right, before the court, trying to grapple with the fact to prove their innocence and to explain how they got their property and so on. I mean, there has to be some circumscribed area, and there has to be some element of restraint even while you bring the power of the law against the guilty. And then you can seize their property, you can take all their assets, etc., always with the principle of proportionality at work. You must do that because you can't take all their assets if the crime does not require you to take all of their assets. So there has to be an element of fairness and justice. So, Madam Speaker, this is my contribution here today. I hope the AG appreciates my point of view. We appreciate where you want to bring this legislation, why you want to bring it. But given all the other legislation we have related to this, and given the fact that the issue of human rights and property rights are very important consideration, I would say make this a law for the criminals and protect the innocent. Don't allow the innocent to go down with the guilty. Thank you very, very much.
Honorable members, the sitting is now suspended. We shall resume at 5:05.